Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Demigod Naruto Got Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Waking up wasn't so bad. Honestly, it came as a bit of a surprise to Naruto. When you've spent a pivotal 2 days of your life fighting reincarnated zombies, meet the disembodied spirit of your transmigrated father, and decide to flash a goddess with a tasteful amount of boy-and-boy action, you come to the conclusion that not only does the afterlife exist, but everyone ended up there in the end. There was a comfort there, knowing that once his work was done and he had finished what he set out to do, that he could pop his clogs and sally forth to the next great adventure. He had hardly expected that adventure to be quite so literal, and starting up quite so soon, he'd expected to die and be dead. One and done. Off to the pearly gates to meet his parents. That sort of thing, no lingering grudge or will to send his soul on the roulette wheel of samsara. Death was supposed to stick and all that. He'd accepted his end with open arms. It had been a good one, too. Spectacular. Rather than die a miserable death in battle, he'd lived a full life before passing away in his bed at the ripe old age of 200. Yup, 200. Uzumaki genetics, they were stubborn, even in death. So it was with somewhat muted surprise and slight consternation that sensory feeling was returned to him. With it came the unfamiliar sound of a woman screeching in pain, and with it another's voice giving encouragement. There's a reason why we don't tend to remember our births. Frankly speaking, it's horrifying. Imagine being at rest, knowing that all you have known is warmth and safety seamlessly blended in his case to the release of death, only to be forced through what is essentially the eye of a needle into a bright land of indifference. Noise by the sage, it was noisy, new synapses firing, sensory overload layering from new skin and new eyes that refused to open even as he consciously willed them to. The experience was so awful that he briefly forgot just what it was that he had been doing prior to birth. Opening his eyes like this was honestly a little intriguing. Oh yeah, his mind filled in, taking a second to notice where memory ended and conscious thought began, being dead. Honestly, not the kind of thing you'd catch yourself forgetting. That's right, he remembered now. He had gone gladly to his grave surrounded by his descendants. His grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and the like. A true Uzumaki lived for a terribly long time after all, and a Jinchuriki even more so. Sure, maybe that ridiculous level of longevity might have made him a little snarky along the way, but that was to be expected, wasn't it? With old age came wisdom, and with wisdom came the realization that life itself was fleeting. Best to be enjoyed while it lasted and come what may. As such, Naruto observed the proceedings with a distant sort of detachment, faintly amused by it all. Comprehension began to niggle at the back of his mind nevertheless, which prompted something of a problem. Wait a minute, I'm dead. So what in the name of Kurama's non-existent sack am I doing being born? As grandiose as his minute-old existential crisis sounded, reverberating inside the confines of his otherwise newly pink brain, the panic soon gave way to curiosity. Taking in his surroundings with watering fresh eyes, he would be delighted to see that they, at least, were a vibrant shade of orange. Naruto found himself in a large room opening onto a balcony overlooking a star-studded dawn, the inkiness of the night giving way to the coming sun that filled the room with an awesome red light. Tall gilded bookshelves lined the walls of the room containing a variety of books, trinkets, and other curiosities that hummed with a tinkling sound and internal blue light, the same light that twinkled from the assortment of noble furniture. He'd never seen a vanity mirror the size of a small building before, but somehow it fit in with the luxurious bed he found himself in the center of, swaddled in dark blue silks and clutched against the of a slowly panting woman. Wait a second. What's this? He squinted up at said woman, a regal beauty with long, flowing dark hair. Sweat streamed down her brow in taxing rivulets, but her exhausted face was full of fascination and deep adoration, directed solely at him. I don't recognize her. Why is she looking at me like that? He felt the woman shift the silks she held him in, eyes never once leaving his pudgy face. Indeed, the dark-haired stranger gazed upon him as if he were her entire world. Baffling. Wait, he was being held. That was it. That explained this strange sensation. He could feel gentle hands wrapped around his body, holding him, cradling him close, almost as if he were. Realization broke like the dawn. Perhaps, 100 years ago, he might have felt dismayed. Now, he started to laugh. Well, wasn't this interesting, unexpected, curious, even? Kurama, he shot a mental thread inward, feeling his internal voice bleed off into the darkness of his soul. A beat of concern rose in Naruto's mind when silence reigned. No response. He tried again, fearing it would be in vain, and was rewarded with a groan not a few seconds later. Ach, my head. A familiar growl prickled against his awareness, sounding like he had just suffered a truly God-filling hangover. Feels like we just got run through a blender. The laughter redoubled. Isn't he lovely? Beloved, the woman spoke in a tongue Naruto didn't recognize yet intuitively understood. He wondered briefly if Ninshu was at play. Another question that could be answered later. He was too busy giggling to himself for the time being. What shall we name our little sweeting? A man's voice hummed from across the room. Naruto craned his weak neck to see a tall man, red of hair with precise features, dressed in a red and gold doublet with a short kilt. Unlike what he assumed to be his mother, this one's eyes were a bright gold. He giggles in the face of the fresh dawn, bringing light into our life with the day. A happy son indeed. Raidon sounds like the perfect choice. A faint smile creased the newly named babe's cheeks. Raidon, that's the name you gave me, all right. I'll allow it. Strange, his voice had an odd echo to it, much like theirs. Wait. Why had everything stopped? Time itself stretched onto into eternity as those faint, squeaky words echoed through the birthing chamber. The regal man, the woman who clutched him close, even the assorted handmaidens carrying wide towels and water from the room, all became statues, looking at him as if he'd grown a second head. The woman yelped. He spoke. Naruto blinked before squeaking in amusement. Oh, I can still talk. He touched his cheek with a pudgy hand. Well, that's useful. He waved his arm up and down. Seems I have full motor control, too. Good. At least I won't have suffer through diapers again. What's wrong? He surveyed the room and several sets of mouths that gaped and closed like goldfish. You act as if you've never seen a baby talk before. The couple shared a look of incredulous surprise before lifting the little redhead up and holding him close, their surprise bleeding into pride. By the gods, just born and already talking is expected of my son. When it came time to convey this story to the Carian royal scribe, it was said that the man who would go on to be known as General Raidon, conqueror of the stars, was born standing up with nary a cry. And while the truth was something far more bizarre and sworn to secrecy, it was something that the king and queen agreed upon every time they laid eyes on him. It was Raidon, the sun warmed their spirits, he who made them happy. And elsewhere, another life had come into the world, a most special one indeed. Leyndell, royal capital of the lands between, was known for many things. One of its least discussed facets was its soundscape. On a normal day, one could not go 5 meters without hearing the distant sound of the chosen of the peerage making their passage to and from the city most closely touched by the Golden Order. It was not unheard of for the sounds of skilled artisans to play their music of choice from the rooftops using gilded flutes or bespoke cornets. And when the wind fell just so, one could hear the distant but ever-present hum of the Erd tree, the grace of the goddess Queen Marika the Eternal made manifest. Tonight, there was nothing compared to the innermost sanctum of the castle, stronghold of the goddess herself. Oh, what sounds and mystical hymns were whispered in the presence of the goddess and her consort. FFFUCCCKK screamed a refined voice pushed to the point of crassness. Godfrey winced, watching his beloved thrash upon the bed sheets, her glowing ichor cooling on the black silk sheets as she raged. There were very few things that frightened the Elden Lord. He had routed armies, reduced enemy holds to a barren wasteland of superheated glass, snapped a Lingrave bear's neck when he was nearly 10. But right now, he was terrified. Not for his love, of course, for as she twisted and turned, a squall of handmaidens dabbing her forehead, she was bringing his heir into the world. Marika would survive this. She was immortal, eternal, the light of his life and the apple of his eye. Nay, it was for himself whom he feared. And he grunted, his beefy arm giving a wet-sounding crack when Marika's iron grip punched a 7th compound fracture into his radial bone. These last few hours of labor had been brutal indeed. Saras chuffed in sympathy on his shoulder and encouraged him to try and soothe his wife. Push, my love, you're so close now. Marika did not take his encouragement well if the 3 cracks from his ulna bone were anything to go by. You did this to me, you bearded brute. If I survive this, I swear, I am going to shatter your pelvic sea. Her threat devolved into another shriek of pain. Godfrey felt a certain level of irony from that, even as the handmaidens prevented Marika from reaching for her hammer to prang him across the temple. As with anything of worth in this life, there was a toll to be paid. To gain strength you sacrificed time, for wisdom you offered patience, and for life the price was pain. Crunch. For me as well it seems, he winced as Marika's grip redoubled. Even if she was a true god, bearing a child was painful. He might not have an arm left at this rate. But eventually the room was filled with a new sound, far divorced from the hoarse shrieks of the pregnant queen or the Elden Lord's slowly splintering arm. It was a cry that silenced the rest, the full-throated and brilliant wail of new life, for Godwyn the Golden had just been born into the world. Almost a pity. He'd hoped for a daughter. Gwynevere had a lovely ring to it. Perhaps the next, then oh. His eyes bulged as another life was coaxed from his wife's womb, a squalling girl. Twins. Gods preserve him. He hadn't expected that and oh, the ground was rushing toward his face. Marika released her consort's arm with a wet pop, her fingers tipped with his, and made a grab for the black silk swathed children. Their sire toppled to the ground, spent from 9 hours of enduring his queen's pain and fury. She held them close and looked down at them, struck by just how perfect they were. Her Godwyn, her son, her firstborn, and her Gwynevere, her lovely little daughter. Nothing in this world is so perfect as the two of thee. She cooed at them, a far cry from the fearless and stern martial leader she was feared as, now the golden-haired mother that the order preached her to be. Yet as she sat there, oblivious to her handmaidens swabbing the sweat from her body in favor of committing the newborn faces of her son and daughters to memory, there was a snag. It began like an itch at the back of her mind, a telltale and loathsomely familiar presence that was neither word nor feeling, the magisterially malignant concepts of the greater will commune to her. Marika wanted nothing more than to present her bare bottom to the Erd-tree and make vulgar gestures for the incorporeal creature having interrupted this special moment. But she had neither the strength after the painful birth nor the want to make her twins hear something so rash. He was too perfect for that. So she sat there, rocking her perfect golden children against her bosom as they burbled incoherently, no doubt subconsciously interpreting the warbles through the Elden Ring. The goddess paused, recognizing the object of the wolf's thoughts. It was concerned at something Raidon had done. No, that wasn't right. Something that my brother self has brought into this world, she thought, catching glimpses of euphoria along their shared soul. She wondered idly what could have him so happy and why it made the wolf quaver so. No matter, for it did not concern her in slightest. Her face broke into a small but genuine smile. Let the will seethe. I care not for Radagon's path. I am simply glad he is euphoric. And if the besotted will is afraid, then let it suffer. Today is our day, not its. With this lingering thoughts, she put it out of her mind. Only the scantest of thoughts remained. Perhaps one day little Godwyn and Gwynevere would find themselves a friend. Yes, she rather liked the sound of that. Rennala worried for her child. Make no mistake, Raidon was a lovely boy and she cherished her son with all her heart and soul, but sometimes he acted oh so strange. Terribly strange indeed. Never mind the curious matter of him speaking at birth, nor the quick rate of his growth. She could even bring herself to ignore his insatiable hunger, but this. Sometimes she wondered if she'd gone wrong somewhere. Were they at fault? 3 years old, and already in lessons, already acting like an adult. Except when he didn't. She should have been happy. He'd finally acted his age. So why was she so concerned? You mustn't be so rough with your teachers, Raidon. She tried to keep her face stern as she stared down at her firstborn. They'll think you arrogant. Arrogant who decided that her boy blinked up at her from where he sat in her lap, pale-faced, the very picture of innocence as his legs swayed to and fro. I don't think I'm arroganty, that feels nice. He hummed a little as she ran her fingers through the tangled mane of his crimson hair. One of my teachers was bullying a student. I stopped them. I'm right. They're wrong. That's all there is to it. Now they won't bully anyone else. Rennala tutted softly, hiding a smile behind her hand. That may be so, my sweet summer child, but even so you cannot simply say such or beat down every bully you see. He tilted his head. Why not? Raidon laughed in the background as he sharpened his sword. Was it not as I said, he is my son, after all? Yes, he certainly has your overwhelming pride. Rennala reached around to swat him on the arm. May the moonlight save me from stubborn boys. Only then did she turn her gaze back to her brash little warrior. Dear, did you have to use your swords on that poor proctor? Yes. Raidon grinned up at her. It was a powerful need, one I couldn't deny. Raidon snickered, even as Rennala groaned. Patience. Those swords are bigger than you are. You could hurt someone with them. I'll grow into him, Mama. Little Raidon grinned, ignoring the point. Besides, I used the blunt edges on him. He'll survive. Maybe with a few less teeth, but he'll live. Raidon fell off his chair, howling with laughter. Rennala shot him a baleful glare from her. Mistakes were made. The very moment she took her eyes off Raidon, her son went on the attack. A small hand tugged at her sleeve. It was something he rarely did these days. Against her better judgment she looked down. Hey, Mama. The moment she did, she was lost. Raidon looked up at her, hands clasped before his face. When are you and Papa gonna give me a little sister? It's so lonely here. Urk. Raidon stopped laughing and sat up sharply. Rennala saw the fretful look in his eyes. It was a worry she shared. Was that the problem was their son acting out because he felt alone. He had no friends to speak of, and only his teachers to learn from, most of whom wanted nothing to do with him these days. They went through a fresh batch every month. Such was a lonely life indeed. She did not relish the idea of visiting Marika, but the woman did have children of her own. Oh. She dashed the thought selfishly. She didn't want Marika anywhere near her brilliant little body. Mayhap he did need a companion, or a sibling. Perhaps she would not say nay to a daughter. The thought tickled at her. Mama. Rennala flushed. Perhaps in 2 years' time if you fare well in your studies. She didn't miss the way his eyes flashed. Such a determined boy. Pinky promise. He held out his finger solemnly. Rennala smiled and hooked her finger in his. Oh, yes, she'd fallen right into his trap. Power came to him quickly. Too quickly, some might say. Naruto wasn't wholly sure whether that was a good thing, but he took it in stride. What else could he do? His new body grew with each passing year, and his keen mind only sharpened with it. He'd never been the sort to rest on his laurels to begin with, and this strange second life of his was no different than the first. Being reborn only made him all the more determined. To hell with what others thought of him. From the moment he could walk under his own power, he made it his mission to read every book he could, study every weapon he got get his hands on, and invest in every sorcery he saw. He was only 5 years old and damn it, he wanted to test himself. Credit where it was due, Raidon and Rennala recognized his drive early on. His parents were more than happy to have such a driven son. Raidon brought teachers from far and wide to instruct him in the art of the blade, while Rennala summoned mentors to teach him esoteric sorceries, to say nothing of the lessons she herself imparted upon him. No expense was spared, no time wasted. Really, the irony was almost laughable. In his first life he begged folks to teach him. Here, in his second, he had but to ask and knowledge was handed to him on a silver platter. He feasted upon it. Today his latest mentor had isolated him in Academy, the lecture hall, snuffed out the lights, and surrounded him with spellcasters on all sides. Ostensibly it was to test his reflexes, to see how quickly he could react and respond to overwhelming force. Naruto Raidon knew better. Selen was a harsh taskmaster, unwilling to coddle him like Lusat and Azur, yet also willing to push him away's pushing. He made a point of exceeding her expectations these days. Yet for all her insight, she also had her share of flaws. For one, she was entirely too curious. No sooner did he pass one test than she set another before him. If he didn't know better, he'd say she was trying to break him, find the cliff that served as his limit and push him right over it. Not that she could. Are you prepared? My apprentice here voice echoed at him from all angles, impossible to discern. She's 9 paces behind you, on your left. He nodded and hung his head, long red hair hanging over his eyes. Heh, if only Kushina could see him now. Begin. The voice cracked out like a whip. A cold streak of blue light arched out at him from the dark, to which he raised a hand. The bolt froze in midair, wavered there, held by nothing but his will. Another arrowed out the dark and caught that one too. 3 more came. 5, 7, 9. He didn't even bother to use his hands now, rather, he caught each bolt with his mind. Startled shouts came from the balcony, and yet more spells were flung his way to their detriment. Not a one reached him, each was left to hang in the air, as though suspended by an invisible string. Never get tired of that. Magic was a powerful tool, not all that different from chakra. Simple once you grasped it, and versatile, perhaps a useful tool all the same. Yet unlike raw chakra, sorceries came with a crippling weakness. Magic was reliant entirely upon willpower. The strength of a sorcerer's mind determined the speed of their spell, but also their power. The greater one's willpower, the stronger the spell, and thus, their power over it. When it came to sheer willpower, he and Kurama stood unmatched. More spells rained down, lighting the dark with streaks of blue and green. He stopped them all, plucking them out the air, one by one, until the lecture hall lay lit with a veritable cosmos of stars. A toothy grin stretched its way across whiskered cheeks. He raised his hands, and the frozen spells began to swirl around, responding to his will. Selen inhaled sharply from her hideaway, no doubt realizing what he intended. Oh dear. Naruto threw his head back, flung out his arms, and roared at the ceiling. In the same instant he seized the sea of suspended spells with his mind. Pushed. They shot back to their masters with unerring accuracy, packing far more power than before. A series of harsh cracks were his reward, punctuated by yelps of pain. Bodies hit the floor. It was the pebble that started an avalanche. Spells lanced out the dark, sorceries great and small. Naruto laughed at them all. Mother always said quantity held a quality all its own, but this wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. A wild waltz ensued, a devastating dance whose moves only he could see. He swayed away from one spell, ricocheted another, sent a third caroming off the ceiling. One by one the spellcasters fell, some to their own incompetence, others from mana drain, and still more to friendly fire. Poor bastards. They'd be out for the rest of the day. But all good things must come to an end, and this lesson was no different. The dance ended all too soon as the final caster fell to a return spell, clutching her chest. My apprentice, Selen's familiar voice sighed from the shadows. Must you manhandle your teachers so? Naruto shrugged. They're alive, aren't they? I went easy on them. He heard her scoff. If this is what you call easy, I shudder to think what would warrant a serious effort from you. Smiling, he turned toward her in the dark and beckoned, fingers crooking forward. Want to find out? Her staff tapped the floor, igniting the lamps and bathing the room in light. Shall we? Selen understood. In battle, victory was all that mattered. The scholars and sorcerers of Rhea Lucaria failed to realize that. Pious pride meant nothing when your nose was in the dirt, your back against the wall. His first life had taught him that much. In a real fight, when you faced down your foe, you fought hard and took them down harder. And why shouldn't he? He had no need nor want to hide his skills. As far as this world was concerned, Raidon was a prodigy. He was content to let everyone believe such. They weren't wrong. Prepare yourself. His instructor took aim and cast with liquid grace, conjuring a swarm of arcing stars to track him. Naruto gave it a moment, then lunged back, letting them hound his steps, raced up a wall, reached the ceiling and turned to a shattered chair as the barrage smashed him dead in the chest. Ah, the good old-fashioned substitution jutsu. Still useful even now. Selen barely had time to hiss a curse, much less summon a frantic sorcery as he reappeared behind her. He took wicked pleasure in batting aside her every spell as he closed the distance. A low power racing in struck her high in the torso and sent his mentor spinning to the ground. Even as she fell, he reached out and snatched her up by the throat, grabbed her great glintstone crown and yanked. Hard. Off it came. Down she went. Her back slammed into the ground. His sword scythed down to her throat a heartbeat later. Yield. Well done. Startled green eyes blinked back at him, framed by dark hair and the hint of a smile. You nearly had me, young Raidon. Naruto found himself squinting. Nearly. Her smile didn't waver. He looked down, finally felt the sharpened shard glintstone staff digging in his dark tunic, just below his right arm. A stalemate, then. Surprising and rare. His opinion of her climbed just a little higher. Had this been an actual battle, they might have killed each other. Seemed he wasn't the only one learning from their lessons together. Selen's gaze sparkled. Let us call it there then, shall we? I think that's enough for today. The faint sound of clapping cut off anything he might have said. Naruto craned his neck over his shoulder and found the source approaching from an adjacent hallway. The tall figure had to stood to make it through the arch, but it was the distinctive flash of red hair that truly gave him away. Only one other in the lands between had long crimson locks like his. Sure enough, Raidon and Dad approached at a leisurely pace. I take it today's lesson is concluded. Naruto let Selen up. His mentor scrambled to her feet, tried to find her crown, then gave up entirely. "It is my lord." Raidon quirked a questioning brow his way. "I take it you won once again. Bit of a draw, actually." "Excellent." His smile said he was glad to hear it and had Selen sputtering. "Ah, but I digress. I took the liberty of securing you an additional instructor, as you asked." He stepped aside, moving away from the arch. "They only just arrived an hour ago." Pale hands clapped once, producing a startling pop of sound. "You may enter." Another loom figure shuffled into the lecture hall. They were tall, taller even than Raidon himself. Naruto looked up, and up some more. Well, an alabaster lord. He'd only ever read about them. Tall yet slender, dark of skin and darker hair, wrapped in a deep blue tunic of foreign make, she stood apart from anyone he'd ever seen before. Hers was a severe beauty, stoic and stern. Bright amethyst eyes locked onto his. Indeed, her very gaze seemed to command an unspoken weight, such that he felt his spine stiffen beneath her gaze. This is the one dark brows furrowed upon him, instantly disdainful. He is but a boy. Selen climbed to her feet. He's stronger than he looks. Be that as it may, he is young for what you wish of him. The woman's scowl only deepened when he didn't respond. The ways of my people are not so easily taught, least of all to a child. He will break. Naruto found his voice at last. I won't. Yes. She laid a hand on her sword. You will. You are young. He hid an inward smile and didn't rise to the low-hanging bait. We'll see. Enough. Here at last, a hint of steel entered Raidon's voice. I'm not paying you to disparage him, Alina, but to teach. Call him weak and again and you'll be cast out the castle. The alabaster lord pursed her lips. Do not blame me if he harms himself. He'd enjoy wiping that look off her face. Watch. As he looked on, the alabaster lord drew her sword and thrust it into the ground. The world shifted. No, not the world Naruto realized, but gravity itself, an unseen force dragged him forward, such that he found himself all but unable to resist. He grit his teeth and dug his feet in, to no avail. Selen made an appreciative noise. It wasn't lost on him. Do you see now? His new mentor Alina freed her sword with a sullen scowl, releasing him from the confines of the spell. This is gravity magic. 'Tis not an art easily learned, let alone mastered. Her brow writ with concentration anew, and lo behold, a small chunk of the floor tore itself free and hovered into her hand. It takes patience, dedication, and are you making that face, boy? Naruto barely heard her. The gears of his mind were already whirling, plotting, considering. Didn't seem so hard. Like a weaker version of Shinra Tensei, really. He'd always been able to push, freeze spells, overpower them with his will, but he'd never considered the applications of pulling something to him, let alone the application of gravity. By that mark it sounded awfully simple, is it, then? Magic is more pliable than chakra, and this body channels it well. You should be able to do it if you focus. He unsheathed his twin greatswords, heedless of Alina's expression. She shook her head, setting her raven tresses swaying. Mimicry will avail you not, child. We'll just see about that. He stabbed them into the ground, sheathing them nearly to the hilts, and yanked with his mind. The earth answered. 3 great chunks of rock rose, behind Naruto, gleaming a baleful violet. Alina's eyes widened, even as Raidon rumbled a laugh. They wobbled for a moment as his control faltered. Steadied now, as he sought a target. He chose a rickety-looking chair at the end of the lecture hall. It was crude, not mastery at all, but he felt he at least had enough of a grasp t'other. They shot forward like a trio of arrows loosed from a bow. An awful grinding sound filled the air, and the chair alongside a goodly portion of the floor ceased to be in an instant. Alina balked. How on your first try that's impossible. He beamed at her. Told you I'm a quick learner. So this is gravity magic, interesting. Pearly white teeth flashed in a cherubic grin. Very interesting. He weaved a hand through the air, calling a pebble to his hand. I like it. I can do all sorts of things with this. So it would seem. Something akin to wary respect bloomed in the tall woman's gaze. Very well. She sketched a stiff bow, either unable or unwilling to curtsy for his sake. I shall teach you my ways. We will see if you prove capable. Selen applauded politely. See, I never doubted you for a moment, my apprentice. Raidon's smile was pure pride. That's my boy. Naruto saw his opening and rounded on him. There, that's enough for now, right? I've finished today's lessons. Can we go? Now you promised. Raidon didn't even pause to consider his ulterior motives. Not once, so I did. Come, let us find you a mount. Raidon felt the beginnings of a conniption scratching at his soul. Idly, he wondered if Marika could feel his confused disbelief all the way from the plateau. The reason for it, you asked. Several hours ago he and his son, his young heir and firstborn, had sallied into the Carrion wilds to find him a mount. He had told his son to find a powerful steed, one who would both watch his back and be his feet across the lands between. Given his son's truly remarkable power and strong stature, he had expected him to ride back with a mighty stallion in tow. Or perhaps a magical deer. Or hell, a god's damned dragon. But this. I know you are fond of jests, my son, but I get an awful feeling that your choice here is serious. Raidon palmed his face with a dry sigh, golden eyes surveying the bag of bones that constituted the chosen mount. Tell me this is a jest. Raidon gave his father an incredulous look, patting the scrawny horse between his ears. His name is Leonard, and I've never been more serious about something in my life. Pinching the bridge of his nose, Raidon gave the pair a once-over. He lacks strength, speed, constitution, and power. What in the name of the moon and sun does this mount possibly have? Raidon's grin softened to a smaller but more genuine smile, because he keeps trying anyway. You may well outgrow him. The words pained him, but they had to be said. He wasn't prepared for the determined glint in the boy's eyes. Then I'll just have to learn more gravity magic, won't I? Today was an auspicious day, or so Naruto had been told. In truth, he didn't understand what all the fuss was about, only that it had seen both him and his parents bundled up into a carriage early this morning and sent on their merry way with barely a word. He'd barely had time to grab his swords and cloak on the way out. Probably a surprise of some sort. The lone knights guarding them only served to further arouse his suspicions. If they truly were departing on some long journey, why not have a full escort? Something was afoot. Made him proper curious, it did. Shall we have a look? Kurama didn't need to prod him further. He was already squirming past Ranallah and Raidon. Propping himself up on his knees, the young redhead pushed off posh blue cushions and unlatched the carriage window. Warm wind rushed forth. He squinted against it, looked past their escort and glimpsed golden grass, craggy outcroppings, and the Erdtree looming large in the distance. This was the Altus Plateau. Why were they so far from home? A familiar figure in silver armor cantered up on a dark steed, blocking his view. Back in the carriage, young master. We've a long journey ahead of us. Naruto grinned, not even a little chagrined. Ah, but Loretta, it's boring in here. No buts, Raidon, she nudged him. In you go. He complied with a sigh, latching the window behind him. He'd thought it a shame to leave little Leonard behind, but he could see why Raidon had been so adamant now. Although his scrawny steed was growing stronger, he wouldn't be able to make this kind of journey on his own. Not yet. He'd be well looked after by Selen in his absence. Hopefully. Anxiety gnawed at him still, worrying at his thoughts like an old dog with a bone. Leaving the academy of Rhea Lucaria wasn't so unusual. He had ventured out with Raidon several times already, even going so far as Limgrave once. But never with Mom present, and certainly not when she was this far along. Just thinking of her in her vulnerable state made his fingers itch. She'd refused to be left behind, however, and so here they were. The carriage rattled harshly yet again, and he risked to glance her way when she wasn't looking. His fingers twitched at his sides anew, itching to cast another healing spell for what felt like the umpteenth time. He knew it wasn't needed. Mom was plenty strong. A few bumps on the road wouldn't kill her. She looked content enough in her signature robes, head resting against Raidon's shoulder, peaceful as can be. His senses told him she was healthy, the little light within her even more so. His brother or sister would doubtlessly be strong, just like him. And yet, he coughed into the silence. How are you feeling? I'm fine, dear. Ranallah kept her eyes closed and fobbed him off with a smile, one hand cradling her stomach. Just resting. Don't worry. But he was finally going to have a sibling. They had to be healthy. She looked like she might go into labor any day now, shouldn't she be at home? A pale hand descended on his head, mussing his scarlet hair. Relax, boy. She will be fine. Baleful golden eyes glared up at him. If you say so. I do say so. Naruto subsided with a sigh, for once feeling every bit the child he presently was in body, if not spirit. Would it be a boy? A girl? Sorcerers supposedly had ways of telling, though they hadn't told him. Something about it being a surprise. Ranallah and Raidon seemed to enjoy those. They'd already bantered a few names about when they thought he wasn't listening. One or two stuck with him. Ranny or maybe Reincarnated. He just couldn't contain himself, so exciting. Still, it begged the question. He had an inkling, a worrying one, but he dare not say it aloud. Where are we going, anyway? Ranallah and Raidon exchanged a wry look. The former opened her eyes at last. Shall we tell him, beloved? Raidon granted her a rueful grin. I suppose we should. We're off to see your cousins. Ranallah offered a languid, if sleepy explanation. Naruto rocked back in his seat. Cousins? He couldn't hide his smile. I have cousins, why didn't anyone tell me? Yes, Godwin and Gwynevere. Raidon amended, noticing his smile. They're of an age with one the queen wishes to see you. I see. He understood, now. This little visit wasn't so much by choice as necessity. Outside forces were bound to take notice sooner rather or later. Frankly, it was a miracle he'd stayed under the radar this long. His parents had kept him safe in Liurnia these past few years. Sheltered him. He'd grown stronger for it, child though he still was. And now his strength had been noticed. No matter. He didn't fear the forces of Landell. Whatever god dwelt there would not upset his planche, wouldn't let them. Perhaps it was selfish of him to try and hoard it all this time around, to cling to his emotions and principles, nothing more. No, it undoubtedly was. Any sane scholar would say so. He didn't care. This was his second life and he had every intention to enjoy it as he hadn't in his first. He'd given everything in his first life. No bitterness there. Only honesty. That meant his second life was his to live. Happy family, loads of siblings, plenty of friends, lots of descendants. He wanted to enjoy this life, wanted to feel something. Meet a girl or girls if the universe threw another curve at him, make friends and fall in love, get married, settle down, maybe even raise a family. That sort of thing, typical goals for a normal life. He wasn't about to let something like death stop him. But before that he was going to be the best damn brother ever. His future sibling would want for nothing. And if anyone tried to harm his family, he'd drop the stars on their heads. He would protect them all. Landell was large. There were probably other, grander words he should use to describe the capital, but for the life of him, Naruto couldn't think of them. Seeing was, as they say, believing. Grand spires and sweeping Gothic architecture, flowing arches and beautiful buttresses, magnificent buildings that just seemed to go on forever, stretching further than the eye could see. And the people, so many people. He could see knights manning walls and stalls, pages and nobles racing hither and yon through crowded streets, great crews of builders constructing new buildings even now, no doubt seeking to further expand the already prosperous city further still. This was Leyndell in its prime, capital of the Golden Order, home to Queen Marika the Eternal, immortal ruler of the lands between. And there at the center of it all, looming larger than ever and wholly impossible to miss. The Erdtree really was gigantic up close. Naruto found himself whistling at the sight of it. This thing made Kaguya's tree look tiny by comparison. Fey, Kurama scoffed. I could knock that thing down, no problem. He was almost tempted to let him try, if only to see what would happen. But no, they weren't here to destroy the city. Entertaining though that might be. Just past the main thoroughfare a squad of golden knights awaited them. Their carriage clattered to a halt. Weapons in hand, they stood at attention. A grand welcome indeed. Raidon departed first, leading Reinala out by the hand. Naruto bounded down after her, grateful for the chance to finally stretch his legs. Not even 10 and already he was nearly too tall to fit in a proper carriage. Damn wheelboxes were tiny anyway. He made a show of stretching, yawning openly. Loretta's helm snapped his way. He grinned at her, daring her to object. Please behave, young master. He heard the whisper beneath her helmet, a desperate thread for his ears alone. We're not in Liurnia anymore. He winked her way. Of course he would behave well, mostly. Welcome to the capital, my lords and lady. The taller of the Golden Knights stepped forth to command his attention. Naruto noted the partisan grip tight in the man's right hand, a towering great shield in his left. I am Kristoff. We have been expecting you. I trust your journey was pleasant. Indeed it was. Reinala nodded gratefully, ever the dignified queen. We thank you for your hospitality. Excellent. We shall take you to the queen at once. She smiled. We shall be in your care. Knight Loretta shall accompany us. Raidon waved a hand dismissively, not caring for such niceties. As you were. Lead on. One of the knights swiveled, perhaps noticing him at last. Judging by your hair, you must be Raidon. Kristoff kicked his shin. Oleg. Naruto nodded once, finding himself warming to this blunt knight already. That would be me, yes. They certainly seemed friendly enough. He didn't sense even an iota of ill intent from them. Anxiety perhaps, but that was only when they looked to Reinala and noted her pregnancy. It made them stand all the straighter, more determined than ever to protect their charges. These two weren't a threat. They were simply good men trying to do their job. Who was he to begrudge them that their only crime was being a bit overeager? Who would blame them for that? Oleg bowed. Welcome to the capital, young master. I hope you have a pleasant stay. Naruto blinked. Young master. Loretta called him that from time to time, but why would these? Ah, you've not been told. Oleg sounded abashed behind his helm. Forgive me. The queen can explain. Right this way. Kristoff and Oleg were men of their word. In short order they found themselves ushered up a flight stairs, down a hall, through another doorway, so on and so forth. More of the same now, taking twisting turns in narrow streets that all threatened to blur together after a while. For a child it certainly would have, but he was no child now was he. He kept one ear out, listening half-heartedly to the adults as they were guided higher and higher into the city. Left, right, up, down, left again, up once more. Naruto kept track of it all, making note of the landmarks as they went until, quite suddenly, they arrived. A tall woman awaited them in the foyer beyond. Warm firelight flickered across her pale skin and flowing black gown. He took notice of her sharp blue eyes and blonde hair. She burned in his senses like a searing brand, a shining star that threatened to scorch his very senses. She sat there, lounging before, flanked by an absolute bear of a man with. Was that a lion on his back? And here I was thinking I'd seen everything. His gaze zeroed in on them, paying his surroundings no mind. Thank you, Kristoff. Oleg. The blonde woman nodded their way. You as well, Loretta. You may break your fast outside. The trio departed, Loretta with a lingering glance. Naruto nodded her way. He could feel her gaze on him until the door shut, pleading him to behave. Was he really that bad? I bid thee welcome. The woman smiled and spoke with lilting grace. To our home Ando her gaze strayed to Reinala's stomach, eyes widening. My, already working on a spare, are we? Reinala's face closed down, losing all semblance of civility. That is no concern of yours. Be assured, I meant no harm by it. I wished only to congratulate you. Godfrey. Naruto jumped at the sudden exclamation, expecting the worst. Thankfully, his father wasn't half as antagonistic. Raidon. The two warriors clasped hands and drew one another into a bruising embrace. You're going gray, my friend. A growl. And your hair is still red. Raidon grimaced. Must you say that every time we meet? Yes, I must. Naruto smiled a little. Well, at least some things were normal. Narika's gaze fixed upon him, and that smile died an ugly death. So this is the infamous Raidon I've heard so much about. He lifted his chin a little. I am so bold. Do you know who I am? His mind whirled as he frowned. With such regal bearing, and the power he sensed from her, no two ways about it. Might as well play the game for now. You're the queen. He tried to sound deferential, failed, judging by the sudden interest gleaming in her eyes. Queen Marika the Eternal. So polite. And what of you, young one? Her regal gaze narrowed upon him once more. I've heard tell of you. Prodigy of Lucaria. They say even the stars themselves fall under your sway. an exaggeration. He wasn't able to exert full control over them yet. In a few years it might well be a different story. The man beside her stirred. If he is as capable as they say, Marika tutted. You're not fighting the boy, beloved. Skilled though he may be, he is no match for you. Naruto shrugged. I wouldn't mind. Oh, Godfrey's gaze snapped to his and he caught a glimmer of interest within those grace-given depths, a hint of battle lust stirring in the depths. Then perhaps, Marika tweaked his arm. Godfrey, the Elden Lord heaved a sigh. Perhaps when you're older. Come. Raidon drew him aside. There are things I wish to discuss with you, old friend. Naruto blew out a quick breath, grateful for the interruption. Could he beat Godfrey? The idea appealed to his pride. He suppressed it. No, make friends first, challenge their father later. Marika was crouching before him now, claiming his attention once more, and curiosity or no, he had to attend even if he didn't like the look in her eyes just now. Do you know any spells, dear boy? The ghost of a smile touched his face. A few. You may show me, if you wish. I shan't take offense. By all means, she goaded, hit me with your best shot. Nope. No way in hell was he going to ignore a proper challenge like that. Gravity magic flared, driving Marika to one knee. She grunted in surprise. Gravity magic from one so young impressive. Ranala hid a wry grin behind her hand. Do forgive our son. He knows not his strength. Is that so? Marika's smile was only slightly strained as she stood. Perhaps I should keep an eye on him, hence. Naruto blew out a sigh. I think I've caught the attention of someone troublesome. Such a powerful boy. Marika cooed suddenly, drawing him back to himself. Why have you not brought him to court? Ranala's face was the coldest of moonlight. We did not feel the need. Yikes, Mom could be seriously scary when she wanted to be. Don't make HR maid. Ah, but I digress. Marika retreated with a sudden smile. You were not brought here for an interrogation. We are here to celebrate. Plucking a bell from her robes, she rang at once, letting the sound ripple through the foyer in a clarion call. Gwynevere, come meet your cousin. Don't keep him waiting, now. A door opened in the nearby wall. Two children emerged from within. Naruto noticed the boy first. Godwin was a slender youth clad in white robes, a good head shorter than him. He granted him a brisk nod, one Naruto found himself half-heartedly returning. He seemed all right, a little too serious perhaps, but nothing out of the ordinary there. But his sister, well, someone's tall. Gwynevere actually matched his height. Her hair was darker, brown bordering on red, lovely curls hiding her dark eyes as she ducked behind her mother. The sight immediately endeared her to him. Such a shy girl, trying to hide behind her mother's skirts. Not that she could when she was that tall, but still absolutely adorable. Come now, don't be shy. Marika nudged her. Say hello to him, Gwynevere. The girl flicked him a shy glance. Hello. Naruto deigned a wave. Nice to finally meet you. She squeaked, cheeks blushing a vivid red. Red, like so many roses. Poor thing. He took pity on her and adopted his most winning smile. Wanna be friends? She reached a hand out and warily tentatively took a hold of his fingers. Looking back, that was probably the moment things changed. The moment every went terribly, wonderfully. Right. Time waits for no one. Neither the seasons nor mortals, not even the gods. In truth, Naruto found it ironic. For all their spells and sorceries, no had, not once, in all the history of the lands between, ever tried to meddle with time. None that were remembered at any rate. Or perhaps they had and screwed up somehow, erasing themselves from history in the process. There were some lines one didn't cross. Had he possessed a more curious disposition, he might have dabbled in such spells. Found a way to extend the time he had, stretching it out into eternity. Perhaps in another life. He had his hands full enough in this one. For time had passed, and with it, new life came into the world. Push. He was the one who said it, yet he felt his right arm creak ominously under Ranala's grip. Raidon and Dad lay sprawled out on the floor of the birthing chamber, both his arms broken long ago in the throes of her labor. Now it fell to him to stay by his mother's side as she struggled. And struggle she did. It had been a rather unusual pregnancy, all things considered, longer than usual, a full year compared to the customary 9 months. The baby had surprised them all, refusing to arrive on any terms but her own. No spells were able to coax her forth from the womb, no gentle words or prodding quickened her arrival. She would come when she was ready or not all. Now the moment had arrived. Here she was at long last. His baby sister. A reedy cry split the air as the midwife fussed over his exhausted mother. Look, Raidon. Ranala released his ravaged arm to hold the newborn. It's a girl, you have a sister. Looks like it. Naruto set his arm with a sigh, rolling his wrist back into place as he considered the small babe in Ranala's arms. Well, I always wanted to be a big brother. Raidon groaned. Where is it over? Ranala huffed, dignified even in her exhaustion. Yes, it is over, you silly louse. Come see your daughter. Naruto hid a small smirk behind his still healing hand as his lord father dragged himself up. Said smile died an ugly death when he heard his whisper. She's an Empyrean. His brow furrowed. The word sent a chill through him. What? Nothing you need concern yourself with, boy. But it did. He'd remember it. His new sister kicked up a wail, shattering his thoughts. There. Ranala snuggled the baby close. You're all right, little Ranny. 'Tis nothing to fear. Her dazzling smile did much to wipe away his anxieties in that moment. It almost didn't feel real. He'd always wanted to be a big brother, a deep-seated desire that he'd nursed for what felt like an eternity. Now here she was, pretty in pink, with bright golden eyes and a flaming crown of red hair. And she was loud. A healthy pair of lungs on this one. Raidon rumbled a laugh, back to his normal self at last. She'll make a fine woman someday. Ranallah crushed his arm. Say that again, dear, and I'll kill you. OT was a jest, nothing more, no need for violence. Naruto hid a snicker behind his right hand. Whatever you say. Ranallah rounded on him. Would you like to hold her? He flinched. I would, but what if I drop her? Ranny's cry told him exactly what she thought of that. Their mother smiled despite it all. You won't? She tucked Ranny into his arms and bid him hold her, showing him the proper manner in which to do so. Adorable little bugger. The moment he held Ranny, she stopped crying. Startled eyes blinked up at him, as though to say, who in blazes is this wholly unprepared for his presence? See, Ranallah preened as he cradled the swaddled child. She likes you. Not quite the word he'd use, but was just so damn happy. Nothing compared to this. Not his first friend, or his first jutsu, or even his first. This was joy beyond joy, a delightful memory he'd carry to his grave. For all his efforts to remain stoic, he found himself cooing down at the tiny little life in his hands. Here at last, he found the proper words to evoke his emotions. Deliriously giddy. Yes, that was the word. The little girl gazed up at him. He grinned down at her. Welcome to the world, Ranny. He didn't miss the way Loretta shied away from her post at the door, trying to get a better look at the babe. No doubt she was curious as to her new charge. He didn't blame her. He was pretty damn happy himself right about now. He'd be the best brother ever, come hell or high water. He swore it. A harsh bang shattered the chamber before he could truly savor the moment. The guard captain stepped in through an adjacent, paused at the threshold, saluted now when he saw Loretta there standing guard. She didn't let him pass, bless her simple soul. Begging your pardon, my lords and lady, but there's a matter that needs your attention. He saw little Ranny mewling in his arms and his ruddy face lit up. Oh ladies, then, I suppose congratulations are in order. Is she well? She is. Ranallah heaved a sigh. What is now, Alfred? Ma'am, you told me to inform you if any intruder sought to breach the premises today. A pause now. Well, one did. We caught them. Ranallah was in no shape to rise. Raidon didn't look keen to leave his wife's side. Loretta flashed a silent pleading look his way, no doubt wishing the shame. Naruto sighed and carefully handed Ranny back to Ranallah. I'll handle it. Here she is, my lord. In short order the captain led him to the lecture hall proper. It was there that he found 3 of his best men gathered round and kneeling. Was that a woman hard to tell by the dirt and grime on her robes, much less the in that ugly gray sack someone had wrapped round her head. Her head perked up at the sound of his approach. The blades at her neck tightened, preventing any such movement. Even so she didn't quiver. Her lead lifted still further as he approached, as though she could see him through the sack. Ominous. Hirama rumbled. Naruto scoffed despite himself. Oh, now you pipe up. You were having a moment back there. Didn't want to ruin it. We found this one skulking about, sir. Alfred saluted, breaking their reverie. Tried to break into the academy, she did. Took down 3 of my best men before we brought her low. Unfortunate. He trained them himself. Will they live? Aye, but they've got some nasty burns. I tried to reason with you, yet you gave me no choice but to defend myself. A placid voice emerged from within the hood. You barred me time after time, and for what mindless dogma? Your kind will never learn. One of the men smacked her with the flat of his sword. She's a sassy one, sir. I merely speak the truth. You cannot hold me if I do not wish it. Do not mistake my compliance for weakness. You've got a sharp tongue. Naruto tucked a strand of red hair behind his ear and fought down a frown. Then what do you call this? Their captive made a low, hoarse sound that might have been some distant cousin of a chuckle. Twice removed. Pity. Bold girl. She had a lot of confidence, he'd give you that much. That, or a good poker face. Speaking of which, Naruto ripped the hood off the woman's head. Defiant violet eyes glared back at him as he tore the sack free, shining from a paleotron face framed by long dark hair. An old burn mark marred the right side of her face. For all her bruises and cuts, she still radiated stoic dignity. She and Selen might have been sisters, so striking was the resemblance. What is your name? Freed. She regarded him for a long, ponderous moment. At length she spoke. So you are General Raidon, the one who would do Scarlet Sky. General, he didn't have any such rank. Naruto bristled. Leave us. Alfred and his men bridled. But my lord, this girl is no match for me, he interjected, never taking his eyes off the grinning girl. She won't be able to do any harm. Now go, as my lord wills. They filed out, closing the door behind them. He waited another minute, sighed. I can still hear you out there. A muffled growl, and they retreated properly. Naruto waited a minute more, listening as their heavy boots clomped back down the hallway proper. Only when they were gone did he dare speak. Scarlet Sky, forgive me. Freed bowed her head as he looked on. I possess the gift of prophecy. Oftentimes I speak of the past and future without realizing it. Perpasi Haitian had said something similar once. You can keep that gift to yourself. He waved a hand to silence her. I'm not interested in it. But of course, those cold violet eyes met his. After all, this is not your first life. You were never interested in prophecy during your first life, either. Had he been a more paranoid sort, he might have panicked then and there. As it stood, he merely arched an eyebrow. All right. He dropped down onto his haunches, bringing himself eye level with the shorter girl. I'll play your game. If you're a prophet, then tell me my real name. Freed frowned. Her brow furrowed for a moment. No tricks, now. He raised a finger to warn her. You lie to me and the sack goes back on. I might even feed you to the wolf. He wouldn't, of course, but she didn't need to know that. Well, I'm listening. Her head bowed a little. There is no need for threats, my lord. I am your ally. Tell me my real name, then. Violet eyes fluttered shut open now. Naruto. Despite his restraint, he hissed out a rare breath of surprise. Oh, Kurama rumbled a laugh. Seems she's the real deal after all. You seek the dawn of a new age. Fried continued to pace, heedless of his shock. That is what you and your friend represent. My visions have brought me to you. I would see such an age flourish. My fellows are not so like-minded. They see the threat you represent and would have you slain. I would warn you of this, and they are your enemies. Her eyes met his, burning bright. To them, I am known by a different name. The faint scent of burning rope reached his nose. He looked down to find her bonds burning away in a haze of dark fire. Yet for all that the flame didn't harm her. A scarred hand rose, pushing her dark hair out her eyes. Allow me to introduce myself once more. She rose slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. I am Black Flame Freed. She lifted the hem of her robe and dipped a humble curtsy. At your service. Black Flame realization dawned a moment later. You're one of those Godslayer cultists. Once, but no longer. I have learned all I can from them, and now seek to serve you. Another pause now, as she considered him anew. Do you truly not fear me? He scoffed. Should I? She bowed once more. As you say then, husband. Kurama guffawed in his head. Naruto choked. Husband, a sharp bark laughter burst from him before he could hold it in. He reared back to get a better look at her. Aren't we getting a little ahead of ourselves? We've only just met. She tilted her head, unabashed. In one of the many futures I saw, we were wed. It is a prevalent outcome. Flattering, but I hardly know you still, her words nagged at him. A priestess once that said I would die. He spread his arms wide. Her prophecy was wrong. I survived. Why should I listen to a word you say? Mine are never wrong. Freed remained unfazed. And all things must die eventually. Perhaps she spoke of the future. Would you like to know yours? Determined which. Curiosity got the better of him and he clicked his tongue. Speak, then. Freed grew still. Ominously so. Her gaze misted over. Silence reigned. And then, in a few years' time, your father will betray your mother. His eyes blazed and some of his anger must have shone through, because she backpedaled and barreled on, likely fearing he might grab at her. You shall have 2 more brothers, and another sister after little Ranny. The fact that she already knew her name, never mind Renala's nickname for her, alarmed him to no end, but she wasn't finished yet. Her name will be Melania. Those cold, violet eyes rose now, searing into his very soul. You will face one another in battle on the fields of Kaled. There, she will unleash the scarlet rot. Enough. He took a step forward. Another now, looming over her when she didn't continue. Is that all you've seen? For now, my lord. Despite being cast in his towering shadow, Black Flame Freed didn't waver. Should any of these prophecies prove false, you may have my head as recompense. Much to his chagrin, she stepped forth and laid a hand on his broad chest, the better to look up at him. I shall gladly tell you if the future changes. Kurama growled, low and deep in his throat. Bold of hair and stupid. She has to realize we might kill her here. Dangerous woman, his mind hissed back. Far too dangerous to let out of his sight. Part of him wanted to kill her now, end her and damn her prophecies to the dark. She knew it, too. She had to. Even so, she didn't try to flee, beg, anything. She just stared up at him with those gentle, placid eyes. It would be so simple. A mercy, even. One quick swipe, a swing of his swords, and Freed would be dead. He could make it painless, he knew, end her before she even knew what was happening. He had the power. Dare he say the right. His right hand twitched. This is the moment where my destiny takes 2 paths. She smiled sadly at him, perhaps understanding his thoughts. If you choose to kill me here and now, my destiny ends. I will not defend myself, nor will I blame you. Her free hand flitted to her bosom, perhaps to still her hammering heart. Prophecy is not a gift for the faint of heart. Should you spare me, however, I will be yours forevermore. Your sword, your shield. Here at last her voice wavered, betraying a hint of the emotion she'd so ruthlessly suppressed. Your very scythe. I will never betray you. This, I swear. A thought occurred to him. When we met, you called me General. I did. Her head bobbed, eager to please him. 'Tis a rank you shall achieve soon. Stop, he flung up a hand, silencing her. I don't want to hear any more of my future today. Maybe not ever. Because he couldn't do it. Killing her out fear or for convenience would make him no better than Danzo or Orochimaru. He'd steeped his hands in heresy already, but he refused to go down that path. However dangerous Freed might be, she wasn't a bad person. A bit misguided perhaps, overly reliant on the gift of prophecy, but hadn't she been the same he'd saved her back then, and them some. Could he really turn his back on someone suffering the same plight? Naruto heaved a sigh and palmed his face. Letting her go simply wasn't an option, either. Putting aside the face that Freed might scarp her off to Sage knew where, the gift of prophecy was a dangerous thing and practically taboo. Even if her visions could change, did change, would be changed, letting her roam free in the lands between promised disaster. So keep her close, then. Kurama, he nearly balked. You're okay with this? Better the devil you know than the one you don't. Fine, we can say she's a bodyguard or something. Might work. So be it. They reached a consensus. Seems we're taking charge of this runaway. You're sparing me. A shiver ran through the Scythe wielder before he even voiced his decision. Have I finally proven my use to you? May I enter your service? You have and you may, he scowled at her, Raidon once more. But I'll make my own fate. Fried made a pleased noise, placed both of her palms over one of his large hands, and squeezed softly. That is my dearest hope, my lord. Tears glimmered in her ethereal eyes, running freely down her cheeks. You shall try. You shall certainly try, please, prove me wrong. 3 years passed by in the blink of an eye. In all fairness, Naruto Raidon knew that was his own fault for not paying attention to them. He didn't try to keep track of time. He could have. He knew. He just didn't feel the need to do so, mind you. Rather, he simply became busy. Between having a little sister, training, growing stronger, spending time with his family, and in deciphering the truths of this world well, suffice to say he was preoccupied. Case in point, he was very much occupied with his latest spell. He considered the straw dummy before him, unsheathed his twin greatswords. Black metal gleamed in the low light of the fading stars. Sunrise wasn't far away now. Each blade felt light as a feather in his grasp, all the better for what he had planned. He could have used a Rasengan, a Rasen Shuriken, anything he wanted. But he didn't. He'd already tested all of his old techniques long ago. There was no need to restrain himself. No one suspected a thing. There was no need for a ruse. He was accepted just as he was. He was the eldest child of Renala and Raidon after all. One day he would reach up and grasp the very stars themselves. What today taught either was something he wished to test, something he'd feared. Chambering both blades together, he raised both weapons to the sky and roared in defiance of the stars. Baleful light bled across his greatswords to rattle the very earth itself. He held the pose for a moment, letting his cry reverberate into the night as his power built, swelled. Wind lashed at his long red hair, his strength peaking, reaching a crescendo. Now, a rare grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. No harm in having a bit of fun here now, was there? Why now, I am as General Raidon as I breathe. You will not pass the castle gate. So laughing, he whirled around, blades in hand. A thought, a flicker of movement, a thought, and his target exploded into a shower of splinters. Just as I thought, he hummed in a voice that both was and was not his own. In terms of sheer strength, this body's finally exceeded my old one. An awful crack pervaded the pre-morning dawn, and he winced slightly as he realized he'd carved a deep canyon into the earth, one that was growing wider with each passing moment, until finally, crunch, sure enough, portion of the academy cliffs thankfully unoccupied crumbled down to splash into the lakes below. Oops, his frown deepened as shouts of alarm rang from the towers above. Well, at least that confirms my theory. Being stronger's all well and good, but I swear, if you try to ride me like Leonard, I will bite you. It was just an idea I had, Kurama. His mouth curled in a sardonic smile. Don't get your tails in a twist. Leonard had grown, too. No scrawny steed was he, not his trusty steed, not any longer, not after a healthy diet of oats and chakra. But that was a tale for another time. He had so much power now, but for what purpose? The world was at peace, wasn't it? Raidon wanted to believe it was. Truly, he did. So what was his purpose then? What did he want to do? He'd grown both in size and power since Ranny was born, perhaps a little too much on the former. It was a source of constant consternation for him and a pain when ducking through doors. Renala and Raidon had worked their magic long ago to make the academy more accessible for him, but there could be no denying his rate of growth. Already he towered over his parents, and something told him he wasn't done growing yet. Fried had hinted as much with one of her prophecies. He still didn't put much stock in those, but she could be quite smug when she was right. And he had the sinking suspicion he was going to be tall indeed. With great power came great responsibility, and although he'd long since resolved to do what he pleased, he couldn't help but feel some small manner of responsibility for the lands between and its people. Large though he was, he had a big heart, one that would likely grow larger still in the coming years with his new body. Brother. And then there were those who didn't much mind his height at all. A shadow fell upon him from on high, then a small weight settled against his back, squarely between his shoulders. He grunted, feigning surprise. He'd sensed her lurking on the balcony above a few minutes ago. Small wonder his little spectacle had drawn her attention. Morning, little Ranny. Lively little spider monkey, his baby sister was. She had hops for days. You gonna get down from there? Pale arms latched tight with a musical giggle. I will not. Didn't think so. Strange as it might sound, he still found himself somewhat startled by just how demanding the little Tite could be at times. Forward, noble steed sure enough, his baby sister wriggled and moved to sit atop one of his broad shoulder, somehow managing to looking imperious despite her small stature. I wish to be carried. All right, where to? Long red hair tickled his nose. The castle. The ghost of a smile touched his face. As my lady wishes. Lady Ranny, a familiar voice cried out, cutting through his words. There you are. His little sister hissed and tried to hide in the long mane of his hair. Quite possible, given how large he was. Nevertheless, Naruto craned his neck back toward the noise. That sounds an awful lot like. Sure enough, they found Loretta hastening their way, helmet tucked under one arm. Her steel eyes were fixed just over his shoulder, a sure sign she'd seen through Ranny's wood deception. Ranny knew it too, judging by the hissing sounds she made. Silly girl, always trying to dodge her mentors. My lord Raidon. Loretta stopped just short and sketched a bow, one he returned with a bemused smile as her pale gaze fixed firmly upon Ranny's hiding spot. "My lady, your lord father is looking for thee. You're late for your lessons." Ranny grumbled into his hair and didn't budge. Naruto chuckled hoarsely. "I think she can go without just this once." Loretta knelt, ever the picture of grace. "As you will, my lord. I do say. Why don't you join us for a walk?" Her pale face flushed rose red. "MME, I couldn't possibly. Such would be untoward." Whatever would Lady Freed say? Honestly, she'd probably say it was foretold. "You're lucky she's a late sleeper." Ranny made retching noises in his hair, this time for an entirely different reason. "You stop talking about making Y faces." Loretta absolutely squeaked. "We aren't." Naruto guffawed openly. Rad and Ranny Renala's voice called from a distant balcony. "Come inside, Lord Godfrey is here, your cousins have come to visit." His brow shot into his hair. They were visiting this early in the morning. Ranny saw her chance and bolted. "Freedom, my lady." Loretta gave chase. Naruto made to follow, but those words gave him pause. He lingered, letting them race ahead. Godfrey hadn't he made a promise with the Elden Lord long ago? He wondered if Gwynevere's father had forgotten it. Probably not. Maybe he should wait here, just in case. Gwynevere wasn't happy. No, nay, nope, not one teensy bit. For you see, it was all that wretched witch's fault. Raidon's witch she may well be, but she didn't trust her all the same. And neither should her cousin, yet he did. That was entirely the problem for the last 3 years. Every time he came to visit, so too did he have her with him. A silent shadow, a watchful guardian, ever visible, ever vigilant, ever a third wheel. She knew the woman had a name, but she didn't care to speak it, let alone think it. Speaking it aloud always made Frida Blast smile, a small smug thing that twisted her heart into fretful, ugly knots. Sure, she was tall for her age, almost terribly so, but Raidon understood her. He was like her and she liked him. Father did, too. Even her twin Godwin approved. Mother had expressed some interest in their friendship, perhaps even the hopes for a marriage match in the future, the better to tie their two families tighter together. Gwynevere wasn't opposed to such. Raidon was bold and handsome and very kind. Ever the perfect gentleman, he spoke sweetly to her whenever they met, yet didn't trip over her every whim as other suitors did. He did not seek her hand for money, fame, or power. If anything, he didn't even seem to be aware of her blooming feelings whatsoever. And didn't that just sting? In all likelihood, he was the one person who ever could wed her, given the way she towered over nearly everyone else. But not him. He helped her forget. She liked having someone the same size as she. It made her feel normal, not quite so large, not a constant source of gossip back in the capital, not an embarrassment. When she was with him, she felt delightfully ordinary. There were even rumors he may well be named general soon, commander of Liurnia's armies. Yet another feather in his cap. Everything was fine between them, good, grand even. Then that wicked witch waltzed in with her witchery and wrapped Raidon around her finger. T wasn't fair. She got to see Raidon every day while she was lucky to see him but a few times a year. Even today was something of a miracle. Father had expressed his intent to bring Godwin to Liurnia for some minor matter and she'd begged to come with him, meek though she was. But no more. Today things changed. Today, Sheshio gods, she couldn't do this. Gwynevere ducked back around the corner, gripping her parcel in hand. Her heart wasn't ready. She'd thought she was, but she wasn't. He was right there, just around the corner, and yet she couldn't bring herself to try and approach. It felt as though her very legs were rooted where she stood, unable to take a single step forward. "Why ever are you holding those for flowers, dear sister?" Gwynevere nearly leaped clean out her slippers. Panic, deny. Indeed, she jolted where she stood and glared down at her twin. Godwin might be smaller than her, but he was ever the calm one, reasonable, rational, not prone to fits of panic or self-doubt like her, naughty. He was the golden son, the apple of Marika's eye, favored to rule when mother and father stepped down. And Shesh was nothing. No, she shook her head. Mustn't think that. She mustered what she hoped was an imposing scowl and glared Godwin. "When did you get here? I've been standing here calling you to for several minutes now." A ghost of a smile graced her twin's visage. "'Tis not my fault you failed to notice." His eyes strayed to the thorny roses in her grasp, so small against her hands, and brightened with quiet glee. "Those are for Raidon, then?" "Yes, red roses. A wise choice. No flowers for his guard, then." This time, Gwynevere didn't have to feign her scowl. "I dislike that witch, I am aware." Godwin granted her a limpid smile. He'd best do something about her, lest she, or someone else, steal him away. Gwynevere bit her lip. Someone else. He has many admirers. Her twin rolled his slim shoulders in a simple shrug. Freed is but one. Loretta is fond of him in her own way, and why wouldn't she be as captain of the guard? She sees him every day. To say nothing of the sorceress Selene. Many would leap at the chance to be his bride. An ugly feeling bloomed in Gwynevere's chest. It felt like jealousy. She tried to hide her face in the roses, but she was much too tall for that and succeeded only in feeling foolish. They only seek him for power and prestige. She had to believe that for the time being. She must, because if she didn't, she would break. And so she steeled herself, her heart anew. Yes, she could do this. Breathe. They'd talked countless times before. This would be no different. Godwin planted a palm against her back and pushed. She let him. The act gave her courage. Charge. With that silent cry, Gwynevere stumbled around the corner before she could catch herself or think better of it, hurling herself before him. He didn't seem to notice her, not at first, until she managed a timid wave. Here at last Raidon pivoted. How someone so tall could move so quickly was beyond her. Did you need something, cousin? He lowered his swords. I'm a bit busy here. Well, he grimaced at the ruined practice dummy. I was. Now or never. Gwynevere bowed her head and thrust her hands at him, offering the flowers within. Tite reminded me of your red hair. His jaw clicked open. Oh. Naruto's jaw clicked open. His brain fizzled out hopelessly. He wasn't rightly sure how long he spent like that, standing there, balking at Gwynevere's gift before it finally occurred to him that he should accept her offering. It certainly felt long enough. Numb fingers curled around the stems and pulled them close. A fragrant aroma assailed his nose, and yet despite it, he couldn't bring himself to look away from her. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had given him flowers like this. Probably not ever. Do you like them? Very much. He laughed to hide just how hoarse his voice was in that moment. He'd almost shed a tear just now. Did you pick them yourself? She squirmed a little under his gaze. Yes. It proved rather difficult due to my size, but I managed. It must have been a struggle indeed given how tall she was. He wisely chose not to remark on it. They're lovely. He stowed the bouquet in his belt for safekeeping. Thank you. Gwynevere shivered a little beneath those words. Odd. Was she cold? Of course she was. It was still early morning. The sun was hardly up, and that white dress of hers hardly looked warm at all. You must be freezing. He moved without thinking, unbuckling his cloak and moving to wrap it around her. Here, you can have my cloak. Her face went scarlet as he tugged it around her shoulders. Again, he failed to understand why, or the significance of what he'd just done. It wasn't until she latched on and stepped into him, pressing her backside against him among other things, that he got the hint. This time he wasn't quite so dense. It was impossible to ignore someone like Gwynevere cuddling up to him. Granted, he wasn't quite sure why or what had possessed her to do such a thing, but she was certainly doing it well. He caught the thread of a whisper on the wind. Haven't even given me a ring yet. His brow furrowed. What was that? Nothing, she gasped. May I keep this cloak? He nodded numbly in return, not knowing what else to say. Kurama chortled softly. She may be shy, but the girl certainly knows when to press her advantage. Gwynevere looked up at him, blinking through long lashes, reached a hand back now to grasp at his. Would you mind if we stayed like this for a while? My hand-holding. How lewd. Ranala would be over the moon if she saw this. Not at all. He swallowed, throat gun dry. I won't let anything happen to you in the meantime. And if something came between us, Gwynevere perked up, warming to his words. You'd fight anyone. Now she was just milking it. Of course, he grinned. I'll take on all challengers, even the stars themselves. Well said. And speaking of battle, the hackles on the back of his neck rose in unison. That hadn't been Gwynevere's voice just now. Worse, it came from behind. The heavy footsteps and low growl of a lion that followed only served to further confirm their identity. As he should have known, Godfrey would seek him out once he was done with Raidon. Was it too much to hope the big bastard would wait a little while longer? Gwynevere squeaked and pulled away. Father, I can explain. He didn't know. No, what was he missing here? No need, daughter of mine. The first Elden Lord approached at a sedate pace as they parted. I would, however, have words with your intended. Naruto nearly choked on his own spit. Intended, indeed. Godfrey's grin bordered on triumphant. You gave her thy cloak, did you not? At his nod, that grin gained a savage edge. In my homeland such is a binding promise, an oath between husband and wife. Naruto choked. Was it just his imagination, or had he heard Ranala squeal somewhere in the distance just now? Big guy say what? Gwynevere buried her head in her hands. Kurama laughed at them both in his head, the absolute bastard. That said, you seem to be a calm and reasonable person these days, Raidon. Despite the disparity in their height, Godfrey loomed before him. Are you still? He reached a hand back, touching the haft of the axe against his back. A calm and reasonable person, or are you the brash boy I remember? When the moment calls for calm. His eyes sparked, but he didn't rise to the bait. What's gotten into you? Godfrey growled. I want what was promised when we first met, boy. You are of age now. Fight me. Yup. He had been right on the money after all. Still, here of all places now. Now, Godfrey reached for his axe. I shall wait no longer. Have it thee. Cold steel filled his vision. Pain. That was Naruto's first coherent thought as the world came back to him, punctuated by the pounding of his skull. He pried himself upright and shook his head, only to grunt in confusion as bits of rubble came tumbling out his long, crimson hair. Confusion became apprehension, then outright glee as he touched a hand to his forehead. It came away. Why? Slowly but surely, a grin stretched across his face. Someone had actually managed to wound him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had actually hurt him in this, his second lifetime. Sure, there had been plenty of close calls in his first go-around, he owned that. He owed his survival to skill as much as blind luck. He'd dealt with death so many times it became something of a close friend. But this, no one had been able to make him bleed like this since he'd come to the lands between. Not Ranala, not Raidon, not even Loretta or even Freed. This was new. This was exciting. This made his heart race. You're smiling. Raidon, a rich voice filled his ears, prompting him to look up. Are you an armchair general after so many years, or are you still a warrior? Vision resolving itself, Naruto realized he was in a freshly made crater in the academy's central courtyard, dozens of scholars and sorcerers turning tail and running as far away from the commotion as they could. Inclining his head, he caught sight of the vaguely human-shaped hole in the wall 2 stories above him which the speaker had presumably just knocked him through. A murky shape peeked out from the hole before leaping down into the courtyard with a crash. The familiar jovial yet excited face of the Elden Lord wielding his axe ventured in his sight, and it all came flooding back. Right, he remembered now. Godfrey had attacked him earlier. Even now the big bastard was waiting for him to get up, axe in hand, ever honorable, refusing to kick him while he was down. He could respect that. It wasn't a beating he wanted, but a brawl. A true battle between equals for all of Raya Lucaria and perhaps the world to witness firsthand. Kurama leered within him. He just hit you, what are you going to do about it? His eyes blazed gold. There could be only one answer. Hit him harder. If it was a fight he wanted. An armchair general, he righted himself with a grin and reached over his shoulders, his great height matching the Elden Lord. Large hands grasped the hefty hilts of his star-scoured greatswords and drew them with a sonorous rasp of steel. Absolutely not. Godfrey's grin grew to match his grin as he lumbered forth to meet him. But I think myself a warrior, so let's make war. He lunged, letting loose a battle cry that shook the surrounding. The Lord of Gold met him with no hesitation, hefting his axe and cleaving it downwards in a helm-splitting arc, meeting the horizontally slashing greatswords as they crossed, a resonant clang echoing into the sky. Naruto considered a blade lock, but before the sparks of the initial clash had even touched the ground, Godfrey was already in motion, momentarily pulling the axe back to let the twin sword continue their horizontal arc. The weapon shifted minutely, tipping the axe's head up to allow the crossed blades underneath it before slamming the golden edge down on them. The blades dipped, and Godfrey stepped in, thrusting the weighted head of his war-axe towards Naruto's throat now that it was unobstructed. Seeing the blunt mallet of pain careening for his Adam's apple, instinct took over. Gripping the handles of the paired greatswords harder, Naruto kicked out with a leg and caught the flat of the right sword and leant forwards, his momentum and Godfrey's forwards motion carrying the sword forwards to stab at his opponent's center line. The Lord's grin grew brighter at the counter and answered with one of his own, pivoting on his foot to twirl out of the path of the stab and taking a swing at Naruto. Said Reincarnated shinobi switched the left sword into a reverse grip, blocking as they streaked past each other. Both were sent skidding through the dirt for a few feet before launching themselves at one another again in a whirl of blades. A rain of hefty crashes and clangs accompanied the deluge of slices, thrusts, parries, and riposts that the pair unleashed upon one another in fractions of a second. Godfrey had reached, but Naruto had a larger cutting surface to work with, and it was not long until a fringed riposte yielded Naruto his first wound on his opponent, the tip of his sword catching Godfrey's cheek. Naruto saw the momentary lapse in concentration that the small wound had imparted and capitalized instantly, leaping into the air above Godfrey to whip both star-scoured greatswords down on his head as if they were weightless. Ha! The axeman cheered, thoroughly enjoying himself. The long handle of his axe switched from one hand to another in a show of great dexterity before he threw the axe, arresting Naruto's sword motions for but a moment. A moment was all he needed. The Lord jumped, an inhuman action akin to a cannon firing, amassing his strength and releasing it. Before Naruto could bring his swords up in defense, Godfrey had already locked both hands around his skull and drove his knee into Naruto's face. Black stars burst into life in Naruto's vision, staggered by the massive and sudden blunt force trauma to his head. He thanked the stars above that his body was sturdier than sense as it let him hold on to enough reason to realize that Godfrey had let go of his head and was reaching for his axe, still in the air. It was in that moment that a sudden wave of emotion came over Naruto, an annoyance banal and caused but of a magnitude that set him into a right rage. He's in the sky, my sky. His knuckles turned white around the sword handles before he let out a battle cry. Gravity magic bloomed across his body in a violet corona, sending himself flying at Godfrey, who had just retaken the errant axe. The old man doubled over when Naruto slammed the pommels of both his swords into his gut, knocking the air from his lungs. A glimmer of faint gold light twinkled from the corner of Naruto's vision, and his danger senses screamed in warning. Not doubting his own instincts, whipped his head backwards just in time to avoid the swipe of a spectral paw of a translucent specter that glowered at him from Godfrey's shoulder. Sarash roared in challenge, not taking well to his partner being brutalized. Kurama rallied, "Focus on the old man and leave the sour cat to me." Hiya! Naruto grunted, sweeping under a blind jab that Godfrey sent his way before slamming his shoulders into the older man's solar plexus and wrapping his arms around his midsection in a tackle. One issue with airborne combat was the lack of leverage, nothing to push off against and yield greater power into your strikes. In his prior life, Naruto had found his ways around the issue long before he had been blessed with flight in his Raidon. Let it be said that gravid magic leveled most playing fields. Magic thrumming with inhuman power, Naruto and Godfrey shot into the air above the academy before jetting through the sky at speeds the eye could not track, gravity magic carrying the old man all the way. Godfrey roared in appreciation and began to relentlessly rain punches and elbows down on Naruto's unprotected head. Every time Sarash tried to join the medley, a glimmering gold chakra arm would emerge from Naruto's back to smack the limb aside and deck the spectral ion in the face. You've no clue how wonderful this feels, how many ages it has been since I could fight against someone without fear they would be vaporized by my first strike, the Elden Lord bellowed over the wind, a cone of cavitation forming around them before shattering as they passed the sound barrier. Haymaker after haymaker thundered into the crown of Naruto's head and face, welts and bruising already starting to form, but his burning eyes no less strongly. This was not anger, he realized, it was exhilaration. "Oh, I know, you old bastard, believe me, I know," he shouted in response. When the next blow was a hair's breadth from smashing into the bridge of his nose, Naruto rolled the dojit and sank his teeth into the flesh of Godfrey's hand, ratcheting his jaw tighter until his teeth hit bone. The last person to ever give me a true fight was that bastard Ishiki, and that was about a century ago, so now, with this, it's good to feel alive again. A roll of the body was all it took to send the pair of them spinning in ever faster corkscrews, a maddening blur that left Godfrey and Sarash's vision nothing but a perpetually undulating collage of sky, ground, and the occasional lake. The sight was so disorienting that the duo were totally blindsided when Naruto crashed them into a plateau at just over a dozen times the speed of sound. The plateau vanished in an explosion of titanic proportions, forks of stray gravity magic, chakra, and Godfrey's golden essence carving the rock formation into debris that varied from the finest dust to boulders the size of small castles. Space itself seemed to warp at the point of impact, light bending around the cosmic egg of primordial forces barely contained within common sense before reaching critical mass and spitting out its captives. Naruto rolled backwards through the air, sword slipping from his grip to land a few feet away from him, digging into the ground of the newly created quarry. He breathed heavily, looking worse aware than he had upon starting this morning. His armor and clothes were notably cracked and torn in several places, the magically reinforced metal that could stand up to his warping of gravity bearing dozens of fist-shaped impressions from Godfrey's assault, a testament to his power. Naruto winced from the pain in his ribs, at least 3 of them were broken, and he was pretty sure his sternum was badly bruised if not fractured. He tasted copper in his mouth and knew that he was bleeding, but his stinging face had told him enough to know his nose was broken, a stream of scarlet dyeing the lower half of his face sanguine red. In what of it he was far from done. "Pick up your swords, General Raidon," said a satisfied yet somehow weary voice from behind him. Naruto slowly turned until he faced the menagerie of shattered stone where he had left Godfrey and saw something that made his eyes narrow in surprise. Godfrey stood on one knee, one hand clutching his axe while the other supported the weight of a gargantuan block of fragmented stone, the size of a small castle. Naruto suppressed the urge to snort at the dogged tenacity, instead clamping one nostril shut to snort out the why contents of the other. "I think we've made enough of a mess already, old man." Godfrey's grin was grim indeed. With a single expression of force and power, he amassed the totality of his strength into his knuckles before slamming it into the block above him. The block, perhaps 10,000 tons of Liurnian granite, was reduced to nothing but dust and splitters in an explosion of pure force, letting the Elden Lord stand up straight. "Take up your swords. I'm not leaving until I've had my fill. All of my hate, Godfrey. You have it," Naruto muttered sardonically, a feeling of realization settling over his thoughts as he extended his hands, pulling the twin greatswords from the ground with gravity and letting his power spike to its zenith, a pillar of purple light erupting from him to pierce into the very heavens above. He gripped his swords and held them in a wide stance. For all their differences between him and his uncle, they shared a fact, the ennui of having no competition. It was lonely at the top after all, and when one meets opposition for the first time in an age of a world that did not push back, what could they do but fight, not for death nor life, just the glory of the moment. This is the one who shall give me the fight of my life, to prove that I was right to cast aside the name of Horalu. Godfrey thought with grim satisfaction. He lifted his dominant leg and stomped it in challenge, his own golden halo of energy crackling to life. My name is Godfrey, Elden Lord, the summit of what is achievable by man. I declare you a warrior." Tension built continuously between them until with no warning they both blitzed the distance, Naruto as a corkscrew of whirling blades and purple light while Godfrey and Sarash were a rabid fang. The clash that followed shook the very academy to its roots. Their melee simply did not end, a constant burst of back-and-forth combat that stretched out over the long minutes with neither giving the other an inch despite how much damage each heaped upon the other. Explosions punched holes into the terrain, arrows rained from the sky, and weapons were worn down to their nubs. In terms of physical strength they were a dead match, and each possessed a body worthy of the label divine, meaning that there was only one path to declaring a victor: attrition. Sooner or later, one of their bodies would have to give out under the sheer amount of damage and exerted strength. It was an immutable fact. Naruto abandoned any notion of defense and commanded his body to move as fast as it was able, supplemented by his gravity magic and Kurama's chakra. To the naked eye his twin greatswords appeared to blur into a mirage of 50 separate weapons moving in such an erratic dance of swipes, stabs, and cleaves that there was no way to dodge. Yet still, Godfrey fought, wielding his weapon with preternatural skill and dexterity that he was still able to parry 80% of Naruto's sword attacks and land hits of his own. However, as the melee reached the end of its second hour, the accumulated damage began to pay dividends. Godfrey went for a swing with the hammer end of his axe only to overextend, and Naruto capitalized, lifting his leg to axe kick down on the of the weapon and succeeded in knocking it from Godfrey's hands. Godfrey came to a standstill, aware of the pair of greatswords resting at either side of his neck, their now pitted and dinged edges still razor-sharp. "Yield," Naruto rasped out hoarsely. Godfrey seemed to take a moment to consider if he should continue the battle regardless, if he should seize this mighty foe with his bare hands and dash him with brute strength alone. But no, he nodded once, satisfied, and watched Naruto put the swords down, leaning against them as crutches. "Well fought, young general. he commended, patting the thoroughly bruised and wide demigod on the shoulder and chucking at the wince. Next time I shan't go so easy on you for the sake of my daughter. Naruto groaned at the contact and dropped all pretense of graceful victory for a singular candid sentence. Godfrey, you lost, so please, shut the up. The Elden Lord's booming laughter would last nearly as long as the battle. Rhea Lucaria's infirmary was not what one might think of it. A somewhat bizarre place when compared to most of its contemporaries, partially because most apothecaries and medical practitioners for lords did their work from the patient's personal bedchambers, but mostly due to the sheer variety of maladies. While your average medical clinic in Landall may have to deal with gout from the tide of nobles who did little more than sit on their rumps all day or eye complaints from people that stared too long at the tree, the academy had a variety more esoteric and phantasmagoria to inflict damage. Students cooking their insides with spellfire, scholars suffering from scurvy from lack of proper eating in favor of study, and even one notable case where a learner had got a piece of glintstone lodged in his urethra. Naruto snorted a laugh at the memory of that story. The tale of Gasmi of the glinting bellend was a joke that any student of the arcane knew. Said smile became a grimace when Ranala swatted his forehead with the tip of the instrument she was using to define the rate of his recovery. Be still, Raidon, else we shall start again from the top, she said, her voice serious but eyes glinting with an amusement that only a scolding mother could possess. Naruto rolled his eyes and groaned out in protest. Why must we do this? You know I'm fine, it was just a tussle. You fractured or broke 32 bones and leveled a plateau in a pitched battle with your uncle. That is not what any sane person would call a tussle, Ranala barked, sending Naruto to sink into the pile of pillows propped up behind him. Do you know what I've had to do when not making sure your bones knit back together? Paperwork sending compensation to the farmers whose animals dropped dead with shock at the sight of the battle. Naruto shrank deeper into his pillows. Much to his chagrin, his mother wasn't finished with him. Cowing carrying banners who believed that a civil war had broken out between us and Marracabe. Still she hissed at him when he tried to move, and immediately ranted on, contacting a cartographer to have the maps redrawn from you and Godfrey's bout of aggressive landscaping, and even a class that wants to have a field trip to the site of the battle to write a case study on your usage of gravity magic. A field trip. She pinched his cheek when he dared to grin. And you dare call it a mere tussle? I'm sorry. The other occupants of the room looked at the cowed general with a mix of amusement and sympathy. Little Ranny sat on the edge of Raidon's bed watching the exchange between mother and son with cherubic cuteness, while Raidon maintained a level countenance leaning against the doorframe. Now were they alone. The Landell demigod stood on either side of the bed opposite Naruto's where Godfrey was situated, trying and failing to keep Sarash from fiddling with his bandages. Godwin was thoroughly enjoying the show, while Gwynevere's face flitted back and forth between worry for both of their conditions and appreciation for how candidly the carrying queen could talk to her son. Gwynevere ran a damp rag over the back of her father's hand, wrinkling her nose in disquiet at seeing the bite mark slowly healing. She did not understand how the pair of usually rational individuals could nearly beat one another to death for kicks. Go easy on the boy, Ranala. 'Twas I who started the fight, so spare the rod and spoil the child for doing me service. The Elden Lord proposed only for Ranala to, without looking, make a gesture. Nearby linen wrappings sprang from a tray and flew at Godfrey's face before quickly wrapping around the lower half of his visage, sealing his mouth shut. I'm fully aware that your foolishness is shared, thus what the both of you shall do is spend one more day at my mercy, Ranala exclaimed with a smirk, an impish look that Naruto had rarely seen in his mother but found a refreshing change. Objections will not be tolerated, Godfrey mumbled within his fabric muzzle before his gaze turned fond. The act of mischief reminded him much of Marika from her youth. He turned to the quiet Raidon and they shared an unsaid conversation. Naruto had any inkling of what they were thinking. Seems we both picked well. A few more minutes of aggravated back and forth between mother and son elapsed before Ranala pulled back and announced that the pair of them would be able to leave the infirmary the next morning. Much like her earlier statement, her tone brokered no argument. As his mother pulled back to take a seat behind a desk, Raidon happily sliding in beside her, Naruto was surprised when Gwynevere left her vigil at her father's side to approach him in bed. Her nerves were clear, a fidget in the way she moved. Had her hands not been mostly hidden by her billowing bell-shaped sleeves, she most likely would have wrung them. I'm glad you're all right, cousin. She lowered her head with a deep bow, chocolate-brown locks washing forwards in a waterfall of curls, unintentionally giving Naruto a rather risque show. Please forgive my father for his most idiotic of pursuits that hurt you so. Don't worry about it. Naruto felt his cheeks warm. Nevertheless, he scratched his cheek in embarrassment before shrugging. It's no real issue. Honestly, it's the first time I've ever met someone that could push me that hard. Your old man has a mean right hook and Sarash is no slouch. The lion in question chuffed in appreciation. Indeed, Gwynevere smiled. Still, I feel as if this trip has somehow been fouled by this event. I had wondered if there was any way that I could make it up to you after all you did offer me your cloak. Internally, the tall demigoddess was on the verge of going into harder hythmia from how hard she was trying to keep her emotions in check and pick her words carefully, mentally coaching herself through her plan. If father could be brash and direct in his attempts to gain gratification through battle, then perhaps it was time that she showed off her own direct path. A strangled noise emerged from Naruto's throat as he recalled what Godfrey had told him before about the significance of putting a cloak around another woman's shoulders. He hoped beyond all hope none of the others were aware of the Elven Lord's custom. And indeed it looked like he might be in the clear judging by the curious looks on Raidon and Ranny's faces. Talk about a bit of serendipitous ignorance. Can it be as my boy finally found himself a wife? Ranala drawled, a cacketheckanary grin slowly splitting her face. Shit. He refused to meet Ranala's eyes. Far too clever by half, his second mother was. She had ways of reading him when and where he least expected it. But in his effort to avoid his mother's probing blue eyes did he find himself looking into the golden eyes of Gwynevere instead. For once Naruto looked at her, truly looked at her. She was beautiful to an extent that he doubted he had ever seen before, divine without falling into the aristocratic narrowness of face that many nobles wore. No, Gwynevere's heart-shaped face, sun-ed tan and well-shaped body was not at all the austere pinnacles of stoic perfection that he had read about of this world's Empyrean. She was more a paragon of gentle beauty, a ray of sunshine peeking from a fluffy white cloud. Thinking about it harder, he couldn't exactly think of any issues that he had with her. She may have been a little shy, but then again so was Hinata, and they had been happily married for over half a century. And something told him Gwynevere could prove herself far fiercer when pushed than she had ever been. Hinata's gambit, Kurama mused, following the path of Naruto's thoughts. Naruto gave a mental nod of his own. Truth be told, he liked Gwynevere, both in terms of physical attraction and personality. Surely the least he could do was get to know her better, and if they both found one another amicable, then perhaps they could truly court. In the worst-case scenario, she would still be his favorite cousin, and if things became a tad more risque, well, what was a second chance at life if not for taking risks and having some fun? I was planning to go riding tomorrow evening. Would you like to join me? He proposed, aware if he got out of bed now that his mother would probably ward the room so he couldn't leave. Gwynevere's eyes widened considerably, face brightening, lips parting in confusion, followed by understanding. She coughed quickly into a fist to regain her usual princess grace. I would very much like that, cousin, tomorrow at sundown then. Her emotions were plain as day to him. He could sense her internal self doing cartwheels inside her mind when he nodded in assent. Ranala made happy noises. My little boy's growing up. Naruto buried his face into a pillow. Gwynevere took her leave soon thereafter, making her way through the corridors with a spring in her step that she was finally making progress in her desires, planning to spend the rest of the day figuring out what she was going to do to prepare. An amused voice cut into her thoughts from behind. And so the Sunlight Princess finally peeks her head out from behind the clouds. I was sure you would have required a small army to coax you into actually talking to the general. Whatever happiness had shown on the princess's face dissolved into an annoyed deadpan, her teeth snapping together with an audible click as she came to a stop. She slowly turned on her heel to see the familiar form of Fried stepping out from behind a pillar, hands held behind her back and leant forwards as if on some kind of jaunt. Gwynevere noted the woman's garb, including the two-tone black and white hood, and pondered the irony that the woman chose to garb herself in a mockery of a nun's habit. This woman was no nun, far more a witch that delighted in tormenting Gwynevere. Fried, I see you've slunk out of the shadows for once. Why, Princess Gwynevere, came the reply, her voice dripping with droll wit, the sun feels particularly pleasant today. Do I have to thank you for that, or the dear general for fulfilling your dreams that anyone but him can see plain as the day you represent? How is it that Raidon can stand someone with such a poisonous tongue, and some retainer you must be to not be at his bedside during his recovery? Gwynevere sniped back, lips curling into a smirk. She was walking on sunshine, pun not intended, so felt like she could engage in some verbal barbs. Fried was quick to match the princess's newfound boldness. If I wanted to wait by his bedside, then I would rather it be in his personal bedchambers. But you're right, perhaps I should put in an appearance later, to light him with my presence in him. Oh, what's the term? She feigned ignorance before snapping her fingers. Ah, that's the phrase, a conjugal visit. Gwynevere's cheeks went atomic. For a few scant moments she felt a part of her old life assert itself. A million plans and schemes formulating to do unto Fried an unspeakable level of tarnishing embarrassment that she would never be able to show her face in the lands between ever again. Embarrassment reared its ugly head at the return of old bad habits, and she quashed it in favor of at least beating the other woman in a war of words. That kind of boldness may turn heads in Lingrave, but in Lindell we have a tad more class, and Raidon has already asked me to accompany him riding tomorrow, so I'd say that in this little game we play, you are currently losing, dear. Sweet, little, Fried. Gwynevere punctuated each word with a step towards the other woman until she towered over her. It was with a feline pride that the princess saw the brief flicker of jealousy in the shorter woman's eyes, forced to look up past Gwynevere's voluminous bust to meet her stare. It lasted a few seconds before she crossed her arms over her chest and smirked in defiance. She would not back down. Gwynevere smiled. This means war. Fried returned it. May the best of us winnow. Wait. I will. She smiled softly. If anyone can deny prophecy, it will be him. The appointed day came all too quickly, much Naruto's chagrin. How is it that these things get wrapped in knots so easily? Again, I swear when I put them away they were all neat, but 3 days later. Completely hashed, he grumbled, picking another knot out of the tangle of leather and studs that constituted his preferred bit and bridle. While he could always ride Leonard barebacked, the tall red-headed general knew that it would not be overly comfortable on his noble steed. Ergo he had made the effort upon leaving the infirmary just after midday to make sure the plucky equine was decked out in full riding regalia. He was deeply annoyed to find that the saddle, bridle, reins, and assorted fetters had somehow become double-looped inside themselves inside their storage room in the stables. In all likelihood, a minor good-natured prank from his mother as recompense for the other day's festivities. And it was because of that his face was set in an amused rictus when he finally pulled the last strap tight and led his mount out into the evening light. The weather was honestly perfect for an evening ride, the clouds nowhere in sight and the encroaching summer dusk dyeing the horizon over the lakes a wondrous gold. Walking easily through the doors of the gatehouse, the demigod and mighty mount sketched a brisk walk in the direction of a nearby apple orchard that Godwin had told him his sister would be waiting for him. Interesting fellow, his male cousin, an easiness to his manner of speech that embodied the aspects of the crown prince while also making sure to value his humanity. He hoped that the young man could hold on to such good-natured optimism if he ever rose to replace his mother on the throne. Too often does power wither the goodness in men. Kurama grumbled at Naruto's pensive thoughts. Spare the philosophical drivel and find your lady friend. There's only so much of your internal musings I can take per day. Gone are the days where I could just tune it out by daydreaming of destroying mountains. Love you too, buddy, Naruto thought with a snort, feeling the metaphorical snap at the back of his mind signaling Kurama had cut the connection in favor of a nap. He knew the real reason for Kurama's feigned brusqueness. He just wished to give Naruto the privacy to make this, his first date with Gwynevere, something meaningful. Brushing through the branches of a nearby malus, Naruto and Leonard made their way through the dense orchard with a quietness and grace that was paradoxical given their massive size. As they grew closer to the clearing, they silently spied Gwynevere standing in the center of the open space with her back turned to him. She had done away with her typical princess attire in favor of a white-align riding dress decorated with gold filigree forming her personal sigil, a six-spoked sun rising above the Erd tree. Her hands were covered in white lace and cream leather riding gloves and matching riding boots while her chocolate-brown hair had been gathered under a wide-brimmed bonnet. She did not react to his silent arrival and a quick survey of the area revealed several scorch marks on the floor, Naruto quickly concluding that she must have been, and likely still was, doing some practice while waiting for him to arrive. He settled into watch. Gwynevere, still unaware of her silent admirer, took steady breaths in and held them before slowly exhaling, slowly gathering her power. In her old life she had never been much of the person to use them in an offensive manner, but her mother Marika, proud of her hammer, had insisted that she learn some way to wield her powers for offense. Initially she had been a little leery and outright embarrassed at the prospect, preferring schemes and subterfuge to get her way if things did not resolve themselves peacefully. Behavior that made her blush up an embarrassed storm every time she remembered it. Moreover, what good would she who had never fought a day in her life be in combat? You're so much stronger than you know. Her mother's words came back to her. For if Raidon is the sky that holds the stars, then you are his son. So burn, sweet Gwynevere, burn long and burn bright. Was she hoped so. Gwynevere took a deep breath to still her soul. Then all at once her power roared to prominence, an auric corona of plasma, light and heat swirling from her presence before washing over the clearing in an awe-inspiring soundless tide. She opened her eyes and found her surroundings bathed in warm golden rays. Of the boulder before her, naught but smoldering embers remained. No, just the boulder she had been facing. She'd burned far beyond that. Golden eyes widened. Wind swept forth, ruffling her curls. Before her, the sprawling orchard had been blackened to cinder, but after a few seconds the blackened bark and leaves fell away from their trees to reveal new growths of coiling solar energy in the shape of trees, pleasant to look at upon a heath of crystalline grass. Oh, I did that. Well, Naruto's voice cut in. Gwynevere squeaked, jumping 5 feet straight up in the air before turning to face Raidon, seeing him standing there relatively unharmed save from a light smoke riding from the tips of his boots. If anything, her cheeks smoldered hotter than the sun constructs behind her. Aye, she stuttered, giving no resistance as Naruto walked into her divine marvel and approached one of the trees. He reached up and plucked a single-laid shiny gold apple from one of the sun trees and nonchalantly took a bite out of it. He hummed in appreciation as he crunched down on it, blowing a trail of steam from his lips. It's like apple pie, he described, handing a piece to the princess who looked at the offering with nervous eyes. After a moment's dithering and the general's reassuring smile, she took her own bite and was surprised that her unintentional creation did indeed taste like freshly baked apple pie. They quietly shared one another's presence for a few minutes as she finished off the apple before Naruto fed the core to Leonard, who scarfed it down appreciatively. Awkwardness festered in the silence with neither seeming to know how to begin a dialogue. This was until the princess's eyes were inexorably drawn to the trail of apple juice that streaked down Naruto's chin, the color of glowing white wine, appearing as if some artist or prankster had surreptitiously painted lipstick onto his lips when he hadn't been looking. No, don't do it, don't, she screamed at herself, biting her lower lip to try in vain to forestall the inevitable tirade of giggles that rang from her, the great General Raidon, wearing lipstick. Naruto's face turned quizzical, not catching on to the source of his cousin's amusement until he tasted the warm liquid on his lips, quickly wiping it off with the back of his hand and realizing how he must have looked. He began to chuckle with her, picking up sonorous strength as both of their shoulders shook from the guffaws of youthful enjoyment until they had to stop for air. Getting their breaths back, Naruto slowly extended a hand towards Gwynevere. "Would you like to come riding with me, my lady?" he asked, his voice gentle and smile warm. Gwynevere met the smile and took it, weaving her long delicate digits in between the facets of her cousin's strong hand, feeling safe when it slowly closed around hers and held it tenderly. "I'd like that, Raidon." And so as the sun set over Liurnia, amid a forest of perpetual sun and stars of infinite possibility, two foreign souls made their first steps towards union, like an orrery hewn from destiny. A tiny hand tugged at his sleeve. "I wish to be held, brother. Pick me up at once." Naruto gingerly closed his journal and looked down. Sure enough, he found his dear baby sister awaiting him there in the garden, clad in her dark carrion robes, arms raised above her head. Those bright blue eyes were intent upon him, her long red hair seemingly catching fire in the early morning sun. His brow shot straight into his scarlet hair at the sight of her determined expression. She hopped once as he looked on and stomped a foot, impatience made most clear. It was such a Ranny thing to do. The sight of her almost made him laugh. Almost, but not quite. He didn't laugh at her. No, nay, never. Anyone who said otherwise was a dirty liar. He was General Raidon, he who fought great Godfrey to a standstill. He did not balk in the face of adversity. He surpassed it, and he certainly didn't chuckle at the face his little sister was making. Ranny, as he'd learned long ago, could be a rather demanding child. At 5 years old, she was a right terror to most of the castle staff, but for him, she was still his little sister. Always would be, no matter what she said or did. He would happily battle the very heavens for her and wrestle the very gods. That said, he could hardly cater to her every whim now, could he? He said as much now. "Aren't you getting a little too old for this, sister of mine?" Raidon, little Ranny raised both arms, her expression plaintive. "Up." "All right," he definitely laughed. It was the simplest thing to reach down. He'd grown so terribly tall after all, and she was still so very small. He reached down with one hand, swept her up and gently hoisted her upright into his lap. The little redhead giggled girlishly, a rare sound indeed and one she only ever made in his presence. In a matter of moments her legs were swaying over his knee. She saw his journal and snatched it up to read. He let her, knowing any true attempts to dislodge her on his part would be met with tears and a piercing wail. Stubborn, clingy girl. Besides, it wasn't as though Ranny could read. Not yet. Not properly. She had lessons for that, not that she enjoyed them overmuch. "You're up awfully early." He ran a hand through her long red hair, drawing a pleased hum from her. "Is something wrong?" She squirmed on his knee and looked up over her shoulder at him. "Mother and father are fighting again." His face closed down. "Are they? What about?" "I do not know. They were loud. They had been quarreling an awful lot lately. About the strangest things, too. Hopefully that would pass once the baby was born." Mother was already fit to pop. He had no doubt their new sibling would come into the world any day now. Ranny was rather delighted about that last bit. She would be a big sister at last and have someone to boss around. Not that she didn't already try. "What does this word mean?" Raidon, his little sister, pointed to a word in his journal, commanding his attention once more. She was looking at a page detailing a spell he was working on. "It means gravity." Naruto smiled a little. "Can you say it?" Her brow furrowed. Gravity, he corrected. "Gravy. I like gravy." And just like that, he imagined gravy magic. Sensational. Laughter tumbled out of him before he could hold it back. Close enough. Ranny beamed at her victory, shifted a little atop his knees, then turned a few pages more. "In this word, Harem," he leaned down. "Let me see, Irk." His face burned a little as he glimpsed the contents within. That particular passage was dedicated to one of his outings with Gwynevere, and he wasn't about to say a word of that to her. "Well, that one's about Gwynevere," he said instead. "Our cousin. You remember her, don't you?" Ranny's brow furrowed as she fumbled with the word. Gwen. He fought down another laugh. "Gwynevere. But Gwen is so much easier to say." He bopped her nose. "Maybe, but she won't thank you for it. She doesn't even let me call her that." Ranny made unhappy Ranny noises and pretended to ponder his words for a moment. Without warning, her eyes lit up. "Are you going to marry her soon, brother?" Naruto nearly choked on his own spit. "What gave you that idea?" "Mother did." She didn't waver. "And why not? I always wanted a sister." Fry would have spit sparks if she were standing here. Thankfully she was still sound asleep in the loft above. He didn't doubt for a moment that news of this would make its way back to her ears. He'd have to make it up to her later. She and Ranny had never quite gotten on, though not for lack of trying. But the more the merrier, I suppose. Naruto felt his brow rise again. "Did Mother say that as well?" Ranny nodded. "She did. I believe the words she used were lots of grandbabies or something of that order." Recognizing that minefield for what it was, Naruto wisely skirted around it. "You might have a sister after today, you know." "No." His one and only sister shook her head, sending her scarlet hair swaying. "I will not." "What makes you say that?" "Mother will have a boy." She huffed. "I have a feeling about this." "Is that so?" he chortled in return. "If you say so. Here, let's teach you another word." He wasn't sure how much time they spent there in the gardens together, him teaching Ranny words, her mangling them horribly, drawing laughter from them both. Eventually they made a game of it. For every word she managed to get correct, he promised to teach her some of his gravity magic. With that she rose to the challenge and actually managed 3. That made 3 spells he'd have to teach her. He'd only just thought of several that would best suit her when. "My lady," a voice interjected against the backdrop of his thoughts. "My lady, there you are." Loretta rounded the bend at a brisk clip, helmet tucked under her arm, pale hair swaying, bright eyes intent on Ranny as she stalked their way. "There you are." She sounded positively harassed and certainly looked the part. "Your teacher has been looking for you. You're late for your lessons, young lady." Ranny winced. "I don't like my lessons. They're boring." "This isn't." Loretta sighed, the sigh of one who'd had this argument many times before. "Be that as it may, it is important for you to learn." Ranny settled into sulk. "No, my lady. I said no." Loretta flicked a pleading look his way. Naruto gave his sister a nudge. "Go on. I'll bring you a slice of cake from the kitchens once you're done." She looked back at him, half convinced already. "Will it be chocolate?" "Sure, but only if you behave." "Run along, now." Ranny hopped off his knees and scarpered. Loretta tutted softly as she watched the princess scamper away. "You baby your sister too much, my lord." Did he? He didn't think so. Ranny was a pure and precious, if a touch precocious child, and woe betide the hand that sought to harm her. Life had, well, not quite settled down these last few years. The lands between were ever a chaotic place at the best of times, but he'd found a certain rhythm in things. It was, dare he say, peaceful. He didn't mind some conflict every now and again, but he'd earned a little downtime after all this. But peace was boring. He found himself growing restless. Kirama huffed. "Don't jinx it." "Fine, fine. I won't, my lord." Right. Loretta. He'd forgotten about her. "Did you need something?" Her expression said she did, and her words only confirmed it. "I was wondering if I might have a moment of your time." Why not? It wasn't as though he had anything better to do today. Gwynevere was back in the capital this week. Preparing, she'd said. For what? He didn't know, but she refused to let him see her until she was done with it. Whatever it might be, may as well keep himself occupied in the interim. By all means. The knight gulped. "If it isn't too much trouble." No. He waved her down. "It's no trouble at all." She practically sagged with relief. "I had hoped we might discuss matters of the realm." When he didn't interrupt, she continued apace. With the queen so disposed at the moment and Lord Raidon occupied with more martial matters, a sour twist of her lips followed. "Rhea Lucaria looks to you for leadership." He knew an unspoken plea when he heard one. "Is there something that needs doing?" "Yes," she all but exploded. "The guards need their orders. Provisions need to be sent down to the gate town. And we have an emissary from Stormvale due to arrive next week, yet no one has given us so much as a single command this week." She'd never be one to wring her hands, but he could tell she wanted to. "We need direction, and we need it now." Were mother and father truly that distracted? That was concerning. Still, he'd been taught such things. The orders were simple enough. He gave them, made her memorize them, and that was that. From there, Loretta summoned another guard and sent them off as a runner to deliver said orders. In less than an hour things were sorted as best they could be, with instructions to come to him for further needs. "Well," he said apropos of nothing, "is there anything else? I was looking to try other schools of magic today." "I can help with that." Loretta all but blurted out the words, betraying her panic. "In fact, I'd be happy to. You needn't carry all these burdens alone, my lord. As captain of the guard, it is my duty, nay, my privilege, to assist you in these trying times." "Oh, dear." She was building up to something. He didn't think he was going to like it. He did not, which is why I hesitate to broach this subject, but there is something else I must tell you. "Speak." Loretta took a deep breath and obeyed. "Your father has been seen leaving the castle grounds late at night." Something nagged at him. Naruto shoved it down. "What of it? Where he goes is not my concern. He can do as he pleases." He frowned. "But he does not return until dawn. And you know this how?" "I kept watch." She withstood his scrutiny without flinching. "It is my duty." When I asked him, he said there was no need for concern. And yet he smelled of perfume. Do you not think it odd? He did, but he'd heard of stranger things and said as much. I have also heard him speaking of her. His brow furrowed. Of who? Queen Marika. Loretta looked left and right, as though afraid the very mention of her name would summon the queen herself. Lord Raidon speaks most strangely of her to the servants. I do not mean to sow ill news where there is none to be had, but I think he may be having an. No. He held up a hand. Don't say it out loud. Words had power and he didn't want to speak them, didn't want to think about it. Tell no one of this. I'll ask the next time I see him. She bowed her head in absolute deference. As you will, my lord. Now then, you mentioned spells. Indeed, Loretta perked up, eager, grateful even for a change in topic, flinging herself into it with gusto. I couldn't help but notice you favor the bow in addition to your blades. As luck would have it, I happen to know a powerful great bow spell you would find most useful. With your talents, I'm sure you'd master it in no time. He would indeed. It would help him save some arrows. And what would you like in return? The captain of his guard squeaked. Me. He flashed her what he hoped was a charming smile. I'm in your debt, Loretta, and I pay my debts. Ask something of me, anything at all, and I'll give you it to you. That wasn't arrogance on his part, but simple fact. He'd grown strong. There was very little he couldn't do these days. Loretta made happy Loretta noises. Anything I want. He granted her a small smile. So long as it's within my power to grant. The albinoric woman perked up. Then perhaps we could go for a ride by the lake. She did what? Gwynevere scowled from her mirror, tan face lit with exasperation. Did I stutter? Fried hit a small behind her hand as she faced the looking glass. It would appear the albinoric woman has gotten a leg up on us, as it were. Was that meant to be a joke despite the distance separating them? She could see Gwynevere's scowl clear as day. If so, Tite was in poor taste. This time, the prophetess didn't deign to hide her smile. My apologies. It was not my intent to offend. Godfrey's daughter huffed and tore her gaze away in a petulant pout, arms crossed before her bountiful bosom, sunlight shining across the copious curls of her long hair. Proper useful devices these, allowing for long-range communication even between distant Landel and Rhea Lucaria. Truly they were a marvel. A pity they were yet so few in number, the art of their craft having been long since lost during the War of the Erdtree, but they served her purposes well enough. But back to the angry princess before her. Now, Fried tutted, do not begrudge little Loretta for taking the initiative. She clearly needs all the help she can get. You won't interfere. She shrugged one shoulder. I see no need. She is doomed to fail regardless. And you have sworn not to meddle in my own efforts. Our truce persists. May the best woman win, as they say. You won't I? She tilted her head, dark hair falling over her burned face. I know what you're preparing for over there. I'm sure our dear Raidon will be most surprised when you... Gwynevere yelped to cut her off, then made a keening noise and her face gone a delightful shade of red. How did you know about that? I've not told anyone, not a soul. I have my ways, my dear. Fried looked down and made a show of inspecting her hand. I believe there's something of a betting pool running these days. Of long before you snap and pounce on our prince. I have quite the stake in it, I'll have you know. Gwynevere sputtered anew. You're so wicked. Wicked. Fried blinked, made momentarily indignant by the word. I prefer the term pragmatic. I merely wish to protect him. She let her hand fall to the side that was never far from her side. That man would go to unfathomable lengths for those he deems precious. He would even fight the very stars. Gwynevere sighed. He's mad. Absolutely mad. You cannot conquer the stars. Fried smiled softly. I believe he can. They met up at the stables. Loretta was already astride her own steed by the time Naruto found her. She granted him a brisk wave when he returned as he found his own dark destrier, a fine warhorse nearly as large as he was tall. He greeted them, apple in hand, as he swung the door open and led them out. The mighty horse snapped it up in a single bite. He grinned. Good boy, Leonard. Raidon. Loretta did a double take. Is that Leonard? His steed nosed his chest, drawing a low laugh from him. Indeed he is. How she balked as she watched him saddle his old friend. When last I saw him, he was a scrawny little thing. How could he grow so quickly? Naruto feigned a shrug as he swung himself into the saddle, towering over her and her horse both. I helped him. Her mouth worked wordlessly for the longest time. Adorable. He could have told her the why and how, that he'd use chakra to grant him more strength and speed, the better to aid in his growth spurt. But honestly, where was the fun in that? Let Loretta wonder a while. It would be far more amusing to see what mad ideas Loretta's mind cooked up in the interim. But until then, shall we begin? Naruto could feel the questions in Loretta's gaze. Frankly, he was amazed she managed to hold them in. She looked fit to burst with curiosity. Together they rode out of the grounds at leisurely pace. The guards didn't dare to question them, their reputation preceded them. Liurnia of the lakes lived up to its name, as did the great bodies of water that so defined its name. They rode on the shoreline, taking a long meandering path from Rhea Lucaria out into the countryside. None challenged them, and rightfully so. Even without an escort, the two of them were to be feared. Banditry had been all but eradicated from Liurnia long before their time. Simply put, no one here was foolish enough or suicidal enough to even. That wasn't to say the world was silent, of course. Not at all. Birds whirled their way through the sky, chirping to one another as they went. Turtles plodded sluggishly through the marsh. A stray startled hare bounded by into the brush as they rode past. He even glimpsed a dragon wheeling in the distance, too far to truly see, then it was gone, passing over the mountains. Loretta sighed softly, distracting him from the majesty of nature. This is nice. Naruto waited for the other shoe to drop. But I must confess I had another reason for asking you here. He had a feeling. What? By all means, speak your mind. There's no one to hear us out here. Loretta didn't for the longest time. She held her tongue and they rode on in silence. Anxiety gnawed at her. Last summer, she began slowly, you healed Lady Ranny of a most terrible caught, did you not? I did. He nodded. What of it? Silence descended anew. If you can heal others, would you be willing to heal my legs? She sounded very, very small as she said it. Might you consider it? I thought you could walk under your own power. She flushed and looked away. For a short while a day, yes, but my legs are fading. Such is the fate that await all Albinorics. She cast a glance to her armored knees. Soon I shan't be able to walk at all. I'll have to ride a horse to get anywhere. And then soon thereafter I will die. Fire flared in his chest. Die? She didn't have his permission to die. Certainly not from something he could fix. No, that drew a blink from her. My lord. Seizing the reins of her horse, he drew her closer to him. You don't have my permission to die. You promised to serve me and my family, didn't you? Her pale face darkened. Yes, of course. But I will be healed, he declared. I'll see to it myself. We'll face the future together. A poor choice of words perhaps, but looking back it was an excellent one. It gave her hope, and changed her path. Loretta blinked at him twice, a decidedly startled yet hopeful look in her bright, glistening eyes. I think I would like that very much. She reached across the reins to tuff his hand. Her fingers looped in his, dwarfed by his massive palm. She drew it to her lips and ate it. I won't let you down. Her eyes met his, glistening with dew. "I shall stand by your side." She bowed her head but a little, yet her gaze never left his. "From this day until my last day if you'll have me." His heart thumped oddly in his chest. Was that a proposal? The heavens erupted above them. Naruto rounded on the sound, eyes wide. And well that he did, because something fell out the sky high above. A fiery comet of blazing death hurtled down from the very stars themselves. Growing larger with each passing moment, it showed no signs of stopping. It soared past, plummeted through the clouds and came crashing down into the nearby lake. It struck the shimmering surface to skid into the shallows, bleeding shadow and flame as it went, then sank down the depths. Loretta dared a nervous laugh. Well, that was quite a falling star. Should we have made a wish? Naruto flung up a hand. Something stirred in the depths. Bony hands grasped at the water, drawing something upright in blatant defiance of gravity. And he saw. It was a ghastly thing, a mad cross between a human skeleton and some sort of crazed beastly insect, body forged of countless spheres and bearings just as many arms. Ghastly pincers set in a humanoid skull clacked at empty air, a single giant eye gazing out at the world from its skull. Its wings beat the air, its tail stabbed at the dirt for balance as it righted itself on those eerie, bony limbs. It loped their way with an almost lazy gait, taking in its surroundings with that hideous blue orb. Leonard whinnied angrily beneath him, made restless by the sight of such an abominations. The strange insect herded and rounded on them, jaws clacking furiously. Naruto winced at the wash of negative emotions that followed. Hate, malice, destruction, kill, crush, destroy, exterminate, annihilate. Here was a creature who cared not for negotiations. Only pain and suffering, the utter annihilation of all life that was not it in its kind. It took one look at them and roared, a ghastly sound that bent time and space. Loretta doubled over, clutching at her bleeding ears. What is that? A monster from the stars. He did not know its name, but the world would. They gazed upon a stele, natural born of the void. First of many. Naruto knew he should have felt fear, anxiety, distress at the very least. But he didn't. While this thing clearly wished him and Loretta ill, there was a distinct lack of negativity on his part. His heart thudded in his chest as he sat straight in his saddle. A wide grin tore across his face. He gazed upon this horror from the stars and felt only glee. Here was a foe that deserved to die, that demanded death, and death he would gladly give. His star-scoured great swords escaped their sheaths in a low rasp, the crests within burning with baleful light, eager to smash this new foe. Nor was he alone in this. Leonard tensed beneath him, eager to ride into battle. He could hear Loretta was recovering behind him, riding herself atop her own steed, brandishing her weapon. The beast before them hesitated, baffled by such bravery. Only a little, just a jot really. It was enough. More than enough, really. They fell upon it with a will. The sky bled fire. Ranala saw the monster fall from the heavens in a plume of dire fire. Even at this distance she felt something clench in her heart. It was something she'd never seen before, yet knew of all the same. She had heard tell of such creatures at her mother's knee long ago. Legends passed from one carrion queen to the next, myths and legends recorded in dark tomes bound by pale hides of black and white bone. She was sure that, if she were to see the foul creature in person, it would match the illustrations she'd seen. No, not now. This couldn't be. It was too soon, too early for their ilk, surely. They weren't due to return for another 100 years. She'd been certain they'd had more time. She was so sure. Mother little Ranny peered out over the balcony with her, pointing a finger toward the havoc. What are those? Ranala willed her heart to be still. It wouldn't do to show fear. Not here. 'Tis nothing, dearest. Another streak of fire rocket down from the stars to mock her, this one burning unmistakably scarlet. She recognized a distant shout, a great booming laugh that echoed even from here. Her heart clenched, not at such a sound, oh no, but rather from who it came. Raidon and Loretta were out there. She drew herself up as best she could in her gravid state and summoned a servant. Send out our finest carrion knights, even the outrider knights if you have to. I shall lead them myself in. A sudden searing pain in her belly brought her up short. Of all the times, or not, she tutted softly, sinking back into her seat. Someone send for a midwife. I believe I'm going into labor. Another thought occurred to her. And will someone please find my husband? A faint shimmer of golden light snapped into existence behind her, echoed by a low voice. I am here, dear. My but Raidon could be sneaky at times. No matter. This worked out quite nicely. She seized his wrist hard enough to make him wince. Don't just stand there, put that speed of yours to good use, help your son. Estelle wouldn't die. No matter how hard Naruto slashed or smashed it, nor how many wings he and Loretta lopped off, nor arrows she used, it just kept coming. Snapping and scratching and slashing at them, the demented bug knew no fear, only reckless hate. Even more annoying, it kept warping about trying to grab them for gods knew why. Worse, it knew a facsimile of gravity magic and used it with lethal dispatch, turning the very world and his spells against them more than once. What was it? Was it the only one of its kind? Were there others? Naruto didn't know. Didn't particularly care, either. He just wanted this thing to die. Loretta provided stellar support with her astral greatbow and the occasional lunge of her lance, but they knew the bulk of the damage was done by him and him alone. She simply didn't have the staying power to put one of these beasts down. At best she could serve as a distraction, harry the creature, keep it occupied and give him a chance until. There an opening. The beast had turned to face her, jaws snapping at her steed as she cantered to safety. If sword and spears wouldn't bring it down, he'd settle for a more primal method. Shall we? A grin split his face. He brought his hands together and conjured a massive Rasen shuriken between his palms, bristling with magic intricately layered atop his chakra. It burned with a keening wail, violently unstable, ready to burst the second anyone else touched it. That was the point. It was akin to throwing a bomb in someone's face. Then he let it fly. Estelle pivoted like some kind of deranged dog, tried to catch it with his claws, and actually managed the feat right up until he snapped his fingers and detonated the jutsu in his face. The beast from the stars screamed out in pain, a ghastly wail of agony that made his ears ring and Loretta double over in pain. As the smoke cleared, it crashed down, missing most of its head. Good, he rumbled, that's done. Behind you. Another abomination hurtled down from heavens, landing down atop the corpse of its comrade. It clacked its jaws at him furiously. Loretta's great bow nailed it in the eye and it fell with an agonized gurgle, right up until a third came crashing down out the clouds. Oh, this was going to be a long night, wasn't it? He grit his teeth and rushed forth, blades in hand. The abomination saw him coming and spat a wave of light his way, a searing beam that smoldered at his arm. He cut right through it, never breaking stride. Light splayed over his armor and he marched forward, cutting through the blast bit by brutal bit, close, closer, closest until... Now, he burst the last of the light and then he was upon it. The bastard of the stars reared back in shock, lone eye swiveling hatefully fearfully toward him. He thrust both blades into his skull, intent on skewering the seething iris, only for it to twist its skull aside and deny him the killing blow. Steel SCD crossbone as a raspy laugh fled from its flexing jaw. Far from being frustrated, he grinned right back. Found that funny, did you? He flung a hand forward, body blazing gold, the black light of a Baijudama building in his palm. Let's see you survive this one. Estelle made an annoyed noise and tried to skewer him with its tail. Child's play. He craned his neck aside, letting it sway harmlessly over his shoulder before catching it under his free arm. His limb clamped down viciously, trapping the prehensile appendage against his side. Let there be light. The bastard of the void vanished in a yowl of light, leaving him clutching the tattered stump of its tail. 3 times he'd killed it now. How many were? He looked up and scowled. More were falling from the skies. Dozens of them, bleeding fire as they fell from the stars. And all of them were headed for him. Loretta rode up beside him, her mount nearly as anxious as she looked. We can't beat that many. Yes, we can. He cracked his neck side to side. I'll give them 9 seconds to reach me. They tried. They really did. Loretta looked up at him, baffled. My lord, are you really letting them? SHHH. He pressed a finger to her lips, then looked toward the starry sky. I want to test something. He reached up with his chakra, then his gravity magic, seamlessly blending the two together in a whirl of violet azure. Past the falling monsters, past the falling clouds, up into the atmosphere. Higher now, until he found what he was looking for. A small smile twitched at his lips as he took a hold of the object with his mind. A hand rose. His eyes flashed. Heaven answered him. Loretta heard the low rumble first, then looked up, aghast. Balked openly as something massive crashed down through the clouds. She made a rather unladylike whimper in that moment. He couldn't blame her. After all, this went well beyond mere magic, past demigods, and stepped into the realm of actual gods. Is that? Naruto grinned. Yup, Madara would have been proud. A massive slab of rock came roaring down out of the atmosphere, targeting the swarm of Starborn. Each Estelle looked up in confusion, their jaws clacking in anger, then fear as that titanic shadow swallowed them up. The world held its breath for a moment. Naruto heard Loretta utter an utterly unprofessional oath. He clenched his hand and brought it crashing down. His meteor accelerated and struck the beasts at speed, crushing them beneath its vast bulk. Not quite satisfied, he gave his fist a twist, igniting the energy he'd stored within. The explosion that followed was quite nice, he thought, as was the billowing mushroom cloud that followed. Nothing was surviving that. Dust and dirt blasted their way, the air turned searing hot. Loretta coughed into it, warding a hand before her face. How did you? It really was too easy to tease her. Gravity magic. Raidon, that's much more than mere magic. He had his head. Is it really? Loretta made angry Loretta noises. Relax. He laid a large hand on her shoulder. The technique takes time. I had to pull down one of the asteroids I had in orbit. I don't really have all that many of them. Asteroids he had made, of course, great beasts of pitted stone forged for a singular purpose. His caution had paid off this time around. How many do you have? Naruto's grin grew. Enough. Remind me never to anger you. He laughed. Now, you could never do that. One of Estelle's mangled corpses rose from the rubble behind him. Persistent, he flicked a hand their way. Paused now, as he sensed something else. Movement flicked overhead, his eyes flitted up and he smiled. The light died in his hands. Estelle tilted its head and clacked its mandibles in confusion. A shadow fell over it. The bastard looked up. Freed fell from the sky in a comet of black and white death, cloaked in flame. Estelle never stood a chance. It didn't even have time to move before she slammed down on the beast's head. A vicious crunch filled the air. The foul bastard crumpled with a wet gurgle, skull shattering, eye bursting like an overripe G. Its body went limp like a puppet cut from its strings and moved no more. Apologies for my tardiness. His prophet hopped off his head and landed at his feet with a graceful curtsy. Seems I missed all the fun. Loretta gulped. What is she? Merely a humble servant of our Lord Raidon. She stepped back, beaming, her smile somewhat offset by the blue on her robes. As are we all. Humble my arse. Did you say something, little Loretta? No, not at all. You must be hearing things. Naruto tried to hold back a laugh and failed. His was still up after that slaughter, he couldn't help but find their banter amusing. Boy, don't torment the poor girl. And because it looked like they were about to scrap again, he sought to distract her further. That was an impressive spell back there. Is it possible to learn such power? Fried smiled softly. Not from the Golden Order. Well, that wasn't a problem at all now, was it? He'd always been loyal to his family first, the lands between second, and the Golden Order last. If there truly were threats within the stars, then he would find a way to deal with them. And that power might help in a pinch. After all, it was his duty as the eldest. He had the power to do so why not him? The only question was how best to go about it. Thoughts for later, he supposed. Now was a time to celebrate a well-fought battle. He cast a look back to the twisted, shattered corpses sprawled around them. Best bring these back with us. A crackle of golden light heralded Raidon's arrival, blade in hand. What did I miss? Naruto heaved a sigh. You're late, old man. Naruto returned to find a most pleasant surprise waiting for him. He finally had a baby brother. Reincarnated was born. He's so small, but he doesn't lack for lungs. Why is he so noisy? Mama, is he sick? Not at all, little Ranny. This is just his way of saying hello. So many words washed over him as he held his baby brother in his arms. Naruto Raidon ignored them all. He had to be careful, of course. He was terribly tall and the boy was quite small. It wouldn't do for him to drop him now, would it? He marveled at him regardless, quietly bemused by the little life nestled against him. That said, Reincarnated had come into the world loudly, and he didn't want to be quiet. SHH, he crooned at the fussy babe, rocking him to and fro. You're all right. Welcome to the world. Remarkably, the babe quieted down at once. What were the chances? Reinala hummed from her bedside. Seems he likes you, dear. Ranny tugged at him. My turn, I want to hold him. He gave him up gladly. This was his family, after all. He'd defend them with his very life. Gwynevere considered herself in the mirror. It had been a rather eventful evening, all things considered. Still, she finally felt confident enough to begin the next step of her plan. Could she woo him? Could she win him? Could she triumph? Logic said she should. They'd been courting one another for some time now, and Raidon had been the perfect gentleman throughout. Was it so wrong to want more of him? She hoped not. This would be terribly forward of her, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. Her mirror chimed, telling herself someone was trying to make contact with her. It wouldn't be Fried at this hour, and certainly not Loretta. Which meant, oh gods, she wasn't ready for this. No fear, only courage. It was time. A grand feast was thrown the next night. All in his honor, all to celebrate the grand achievement of the great Raidon. As though Loretta and Fried hadn't been right there with him, fighting alongside him. Such was the stigma against albinorics and outcasts ranked Naruto more than he cared to admit. This was their celebration as much as his. Together, the three of them had beaten back the beasts from beyond the stars. Yet everyone acted like it was his doing, and his alone. Someone had even tried to deny them their rightful place of honor at his side. That they should be seated with the servants. The gall, needless to say, said someone was currently nursing a cracked skull in the infirmary. That thought, at least, brought him some small motive of pleasure. Who knew Loretta could hit that hard good on her? Resting his chin against one hand, he permitted himself a small smile as he watched the festivities take place. Arrayed before him was a scene straight out of legend, a veritable feast laid out both before and below him. Seemingly overnight, the whole of Raya Lucara had been transformed from a bastion of sorcery and learning to a place of delight, depravity, and debauchery. He would have been taken aback if he weren't the reason for it all. Hardy workers had stripped out the benches in the lecture hall, dragged out a series of heavy tables alongside multiple oak chairs, crammed them all together, then piled them high with the finest food and drink the lands between could offer. If that weren't enough, each and every table was absolutely crammed with people. He didn't think a single soul down there was sober. Neither was anyone up here, barring the exception of two. And here he was, sitting at the head of it all, drinking it all in. Speaking of drink, a toast. Naruto slammed his goblet into the air, wine sloshing in its golden depths. To victory. Man and woman raised their cups in salute. Aye, to my beloved Fried and Loretta. More cups rose at that. Aye, to Raya Lucaria. Aye. A fresh chorus of shouts answered him from the tables below. The academy was happy to have a chance to feast come morning. It was a feast unlike any other at that, attended by old friends, familiar and otherwise, even if he did note more than a few missing scholars. Many were eager to investigate the Estelle's corpses. Creepy bugs. They were welcome to them. And of course, a tipsy grin tugged at the corner of his mouth, to my baby brother. Naturally, there were other things to celebrate this day, chief among them the loud, lusty little cries of a rather surly baby currently tucked in at Reinala's. A wave of indulgent laughter rippled through the room, and taking offense, little Reincarnated squalled at them all. Only just last night he'd come into the world kicking and screaming, literally, much to the delight of the family. Raidon seemed pleased by the sheer volume of his voice. Little Ranny was delighted to be a big sister, and he was happy to have a brother. Naturally, Reinala remained regal about it all even now. Inwardly, he knew she was delighted as the rest of them, perhaps even more so. He glimpsed her smile and smiled himself. Plenty of reasons to celebrate for everyone. Still he was warm and happy, full of wine, with Fried was sat on his right and Loretta his left. So why did he feel so hollow inside? Loretta leaned into him, momentarily distracting him. Word has it, a statue is already being commissioned in your honor. Ugh, more posing. Lovely. Nonsense. Fried waved her hand, momentarily disturbing her dark cowl. He has no need of such foolish frippery. The Albinoric glowered at the exile, pale eyes flashing. Spoken like one who has no need of honor. Why would I? The heretic took a long draught from her goblet. Victory is all that matters. Just like that they were off, descending into another petty argument. Well done, son. Although Raidon couldn't clap him on the back from across the table, his father nevertheless made a valiant attempt to rescue him from their infighting. Those beasts will make a fine trophy. For a moment there, I thought we might have to send the Outrider Knights after you, but you handled the situation admirably. He quirked a brow. You mean Vort and the dancer? The very same. Naruto made a face at that, but wisely chose not to say anything further. Mother was of no help at all, she was busy chatting with the girls. Even Ranny had forsaken him, she only had eyes for baby Reincarnated at the Gwynevere, leaving him to raise his goblet and muffle a sigh within his wine. The Outriders were well, he knew they were very good at killing things, that was certainly true, but not much else. Although their loyalty was beyond question, no one knew what they looked like under those helmets of theirs, they never spoke a word. Stranger still, they were frightfully large, nearly of a size with him and Gwynevere. And that was saying something. It made him curious. Who were they really? Where had they hailed from? What was their purpose? Darn it all, he wanted to know what they looked like. He might be Raidon now, but he still retained his curiosity. Alas, information on them was damnably scarce. Supposedly they hailed from the mythic Boreal Valley, a land far from here, and had once served a certain Princess Filianor. He himself had admittedly never seen either with his own eyes. Thinking of princesses made him think of Gwynevere. He hadn't seen her in so long now. For a moment he felt so alone. Son, he looked Renala's way, mildly nonplussed to find her staring, idly rocking Reincarnated in her arms. What ails thee? Nothing. She kept staring. A sigh bubbled out of him. Mom always could suss out his motives. His mother granted him a decidedly motherly smile. Mayhap you would prefer some fresh air. Some peace and quiet as well, perhaps. Naruto nodded half-heartedly. Then go. Worry not, we shall see to your guests. Raidon heaved a sigh. We will. He grunted as she elbowed him. I mean, yes, of course we will. He tried to muster a smile and failed. Much obliged. I'll pay you back for this, I swear. Renala flicked a hand at him. Think nothing of it. Now be off with you, Shu. He bid everyone his farewells, made his half-hearted excuses, and let his legs lead him away. Serenity wasn't so easily found. Escaping the festivities was one thing, but all of Raya Lucaria was celebrating and everyone wanted to talk with him. It took him the better part of an hour to find a place secluded enough to gather his thoughts, let alone gain some small semblance of peace. Leaving Fried and Loretta behind at the feast might seem cruel to some, but it was something he had to do. Just this once, he wanted to be alone. Well, relatively alone. Kurama's jab aside, thoughts of Estelle weighed heavily on him. Those foul creatures from the stars were still out there somewhere. He just knew it. They'd not seen the last of them. He knew it in his bones. Would he be ready to deal with the lot of them the next time they reared their ugly heads? He tried to muster up some small measure of certainty. It didn't last. Because you see, he heard something. A song of conquest and fate. A haunting melody from afar tugged at his ear. His right ear twitched just so, and unbidden, he found himself following it. That darn song. It sounded so familiar. As if he'd heard it somewhere before, somewhere long ago, but just couldn't recall. Blast, it was right at the tip of his tongue. Whatever it was, it eased the worries and cares that had been weighing down on him and brought peace in its wake, soothing the muddled mire that was mind. He let it lead him as he'd never been led before, and soon enough, found its source. There she was. A slender young woman stood resplendent before the moon, clad in dark robes, humming softly to herself as she flitted about the empty courtyard. Her movements couldn't be anything other than intentional, the sway of her hips, the smooth flowing steps as she sashayed across, bathed in moonlight. He cleared his throat. She didn't hear him and kept singing. No, not merely singing, but dancing. She sashayed to and fro, wisps of watery mist trailing at her fingertips. The sight haunted him, more so the words she uttered, which now descended into a language he could decipher. He found himself lingering behind a pillar, feeling like a voyeur as he listened. And yet, at last, her words trailed off as she ceased singing. Say something. Anything. At least let her know you're here. You have a lovely voice, you know. His words rang hollow, hoarse even to his own ears. Why not use it more often? She rounded on him with a start, and before his very eyes, a finely crafted illusion shattered like too much glass. In an instant he found himself face to face not with a small, slight, unassuming girl, but a woman nearly of a height with him. Her emotions assaulted his senses all at once, raw and startled and surprised. With them glimpsed the lower half of a pale face behind her veil, full lips parted in a round O of surprise. Her hair was pale, almost blue brilliant. The dancer jerked backward and covered her face with both hands. Don't look at me. This was not happening. The dancer nearly jumped clear out of her dark robe, because she knew that voice. Panic, fear, why was he here? Why, Lord Raidon. She spun to face him, cheeks burning pink as she yanked her veil down. You mustn't sneak up on me like that. You nearly scared the life out of me. I wasn't sneaking. He grinned back at her, utterly unfazed by her anger. I've been here for the last 5 minutes. I even tried calling out to you. Has she truly been that distracted? Did you hear me singing? A rueful grin tugged at the corner of his mouth as he leaned forward, settled his weight upon his swords, even now buried in the courtyard. Saw you dancing, too. Oh gods, she wanted to die, she wanted to sink into the floor and never be seen again. Would her humiliation never end? Please don't tell Lady Freed. To be fair, I was all the way over at the other end of the yard. The demigod rumbled a laugh when she groaned. You just didn't notice me. The handmaiden buried her face into her hands and prayed for the greater will to end her and take her to the havens. Alas, it did not. I have to ask, though, the delightful rumble of his voice sent shiver through her. You're beautiful. Why wear the veil? Because she was ugly. Because she was hideous. Because she had been told to never ever take it off. That vow of silence doesn't make much sense, either. You'd have a lovely voice. Her face burned. No, she could feel her very soul ignite. It was too much for her part. I should go. She fled. What in blazes was that about? Naruto scratched at his red hair as he watched her flee, utterly baffled by her behavior. So that was the dancer. Curious. He hadn't thought her the sort to sing, let alone be so skittish. It made her seem more human somehow. What next? Would Vort be a tap dancer or something, or perhaps an opera singer? Now there was an amusing thought. In fact, said thought did more than draw a simple smile to his lips, it made him laugh. He threw his head back, roaring at the full moon merrily in thanks for this merriment, until finally his voice gave out on him. What a lovely night, he chortled softly, wiping a mirthful tear from the corner of his eyes, and sketched a shallow bow to the moon, just as he'd been taught. I give thanks for this entertainment. A hand touched his shoulder. You are welcome, son of Scarlet Skies. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up and he whirled. No one was there. He was alone in the courtyard, nothing but his thoughts for company. And yet for a moment there, he could have sworn he felt something on his shoulder, almost as if. Did you hear something just now, Kurama? A jaw-popping yawn answered. No, must be hearing things. Shaking his head, he filed that odd little experience away and returned to his quarters. Once there, he shut the door behind him, shucked off his armor, and went about his business. He contemplated simply turning in for the night after he'd washed and toweled off his hair, but thought better of it. In the end, he found his gaze draw to a well-lit corner of the room. He rose, stalked over, and yanked the tarp off his prize. It was a massive mirror, as large as he was tall, its functions many and myriad. For now, it was merely a looking glass. Is that me? His reflection looked bone-tired. He could see the dark circles under his eyes, the slump of his shoulders, the faint stubble running the length of his chin. Best deal with that soon. He ran a hand through his damp scarlet locks and heaved a sigh. Right, wouldn't do to be seen like this now, would it? With an effort, he straightened up, squared his shoulders, and plastered a smile to his face. Only then did he dare touch the mirror. It rippled at his touch. Gwynevere. To his great delight, her response was near instantaneous. The ripples began to clear, resolving into a familiar face, hazy and indistinct. And then, quiet suddenly, she stared back at him, lips curled in a delighted smile. Raidon, how are you? Well enough, I suppose. She flushed a little. There was an attack on the capital since last we spoke. His smile cracked. More of those. Yes, we dealt with some of them here. Mother slaughtered 6. Father killed 63. That sounded like Godfrey. But then Gwynevere's face lit up and he realized there was more to tell. I beat one. She seemed most proud of that fact. All by myself. Really do tell. She did. Loudly, long, and at length. He listened, drinking in every word, basking in the sound of her voice. She went on like that for nearly an hour, regaling him of everything that had transpired in his absence. From said attack to more mundane matters such as a new dress she'd acquired, Godwin's recent exploits with the dragons, and an upcoming tourney that was to be held in his honor. And then she was asking after him, and he had to tell her all that happened here in turn because she had so many questions. Speaking to her like this helped. But it wasn't enough, not by half. I miss you. Her eyes widened. He hadn't realized he'd said the words aloud. Gwynevere's face softened and she touched her right hand to the glass. It rippled and for a moment he could have sworn he felt her palm press against his. And by you. Thankfully that can be remedied, my lord. I've learned a rather useful spell. Her hand speared through the reflective surface like so much water, startling him terribly. Gentle hands found his wrist. His eyes widened in a brief moment of surprise, then understanding as his eyes rose to meet hers. Oh, Gwynevere's gaze gleamed with singular intent. Get over here. She yanked him through the mirror to her. The world rippled and he fell through. His intended was waiting for him. She must have moved back while his vision was clearing, because he found her hurriedly sprawling herself out on her bed, clad in a flowing robe of diaphanous silk that did not hide her bountiful beauty and enhanced it. The sunlight danced across her tan skin where she lay, lending her a lustrous vigor, her eyes and almost wholly she looked every bit the princess she should be. Her head tilted to regard him. You've gotten bigger. He stepped to her. As have you. That drew a flush from her. She averted her eyes and looked down, mumbling prettily. He took the reprieve to blink, squinting a little in the light. So it's already morning over here, is it? Her laughter rang out, soft and pleasant. It's always bright in Lanedell. Or have you forgotten the tree? Truth be told, he had. He'd not thought of that twiggetry wit in ages. Its light did little to affect Rhea Lucaria, but here in Lanedell, one couldn't ignore its radiance. Annoying, that. How did anyone manage to sleep in this city when it was always so darn bright? Gwynevere looked at him for a long, lingering moment, so much so that he began to wonder if he'd broken her. She took a deep breath and then, "Will you me, my love?" Naruto's brow shot straight up to his hairline. That's a sudden request, one he wouldn't mind honoring, but still, what brought this on? Can I not ask for it from my intended? Gwynevere drew herself upright as he sat beside her. The motion did interesting things to her chest and he forced himself to meet her gaze. I cannot let Fried or Loretta let them get ahead of me, not any longer. I've already fallen too far behind. I must catch up. Still seemed like a silly reason for out of the blue. I still don't see why. Raidon, her voice cracked out, suddenly sharp. Please stop talking. She was quivering, he realized, practically trembling. Really? Am I so unattractive that you wouldn't touch me? That's not. Did you not decide to court me? I did. Then why? She turned her gaze upon him, eyes swimming in tears. So why won't you look at me? A hand touch her throat. Why won't you see me, feel me? She leaned into him and pressed herself against him fully, bountiful bosom molding to his chest. My body to yours. What do Fried and Loretta have that I don't? Do you look at them or lay with them, do you? Hey, he took a hold of her wrist before she could whip herself into a frenzy. I've never touched them like that. But they would let you. She tore her arm from his grasp, voice peaking with distress. In a heartbeat they'd happily be wedded and bedded, bear your children, and words weren't going to cut it. Best let his actions speak for him. He dove down at her. Gwynevere crumpled against him with a faint noise, then, the softest of it set his very aflame. She drew him closer and tilted her head for better access and guided his hands down through her robes, where they fled to her flank, not kneading, but gently holding. She clawed at him, tearing at his tunic with one hand, while forcing his fingers lower with the other. Her voice peaked. Lower. His fingers dipped deeper into her gown. Lower. The door flung itself open without warning. Gwynevere America barged in, hammer in hand, face carved from stone. I heard a noisio. She spied the two of them and her thunderous expression brightened into radiant delight. Oh, the slow flushing of Gwynevere's face was truly a sight to behold. Mother. Oh, don't stop on my account. She stepped backward, swinging the door after her. It must have been the wind. Do enjoy yourselves. The princess balked, her face going redder than a rose. Her door shut. A beat of silence passed. Well, that was all kinds of awkward. Narika head poked back in. I'm looking forward to my first grandchild. A pillow whipped at the door, to no avail. She was already long gone. Gwynevere buried her head into his chest with a keening whine. Naruto turned a bemused look on her. Are you angry? She thumped his chest with a fist and made angry noises. It loosed a laugh from him. I'll take that as a yes. She whined softly and smacked his chest again. Smiling, he patted at her back. There. Alas, his kind act drove her over the edge. Enough. I will not be denied. Gwynevere tackled him. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.